Good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock, so let us start on this second hearing concerning housing. Just one or two administrative matters to deal with. First of all, I'd like to ask the Council to explain the emergency exit arrangements.
Thank you, sir. Yes, just to confirm, we're not expecting any fire drill this morning, so if the bell does ring, we will need to leave the building. The fire exit is through that door there. The handle on the left falls downwards, and the assembly point is along the path here to the second lamp column that you can see. People will probably already be aware as well that there are gents and ladies on this corridor, and there are coffee facilities upstairs as and when the inspector breaks for a coffee break or something.
Thank you. Mobile phones, could you please make sure that they are either switched off or put on to silent? Thank you. Now, recording, this was mentioned yesterday. It certainly does help me when I come to write my report to have the proceedings recorded. But are there any objections to this hearing being recorded? No. Good, thank you. Yes, when you speak, I've been asked to ask you to press the button just before you speak, and when you finish, switch it off. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. And I think it probably would be useful, as there are one or two people here for the first time, if we could go around the room introducing ourselves. Can I start with you, Mr. Phillips, please?
Certainly, my name is David Phillips for Hastings Borough Council.
My name is Kerry Colbert, I'm also with the Borough Council.
Richard Harman, representing Hastings Borough Council.
Adrian Kerrison, representing NCS, done the viability work on behalf of Hastings District Council.
Lawrence Keeley, I'm a member of East Hastings County Council, but not representing today, and I'm generally concerned of housing, and I've been to all the core strategies, so I'm representing those who are often unaccounted for. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Martin Newbold. I'm representing Friends of Specklewood Management Trust, charity and a trust which look after after Specklewood in all.
Mr. Ali May, the landowner at War Valley.
I'm Keith Hollidge. I'm a surveyor and land agent and planning consultant representing my clients, Mrs. Lawson and Con, in relation to the site at Barley Lane, which has been omitted from the management plan.
My name is Mike Pickup. I'm a planning consultant. My company is Town and Country Planning Solutions. I have sitting behind me Mr. Russell Beswick of the Park Lane Group and Mr. Lawrence Holks, who's construction manager at the Park Lane Group. And as you'll see in the evidence there, major house builders in the Hastings area.
Thank you.
Jeremy Jones, representing myself.
Sorry, John Wise, President of Hastings Badger Protection, very concerned in wildlife conservation across the borough and across Brother and other areas. Thank you.
Aubrey Ingleton, on the committee of All Community Land Trust.
Pam Brown, attending as an individual. Teresa Jarvis, attending as an individual.
Maureen Jarvis, I live in central St Leonard's and don't want it spoiled.
Right, well thank you.
So,
yes.
There is a potential second tier. I have with me Mr. Andrew Palmer and Jenny Perkins. Andrew is head of housing at Hastings and Jenny is his deputy. If there are any particular questions arising from discussion on detailed matters of housing, they are here but can only be here, I understand, for the morning.
Right, thank you. Well, we have got quite a long agenda today, so I'm going to ask everybody please to keep focused on the questions. And we'll get to the first one, which is this. Has sufficient land been allocated to provide for the requirements set out in the Hastings Planning Strategy? How does the total number of dwellings envisaged for the proposed proposed allocated sites compare with requirements of at least 3,400 dwellings to which the planning strategy refers, and that's paragraph 4.23 in the planning strategy. So, as usual, Mr. Phillips, I'm going to invite you to amplify the council's response to that question in the light of representations which have been received. Just one point I would like to make, 2.12, where you say in the last sentence, the combined sources of proposed allocated sites, windfall sites with planning permission, and an allowance for small site windfalls development over the remainder of the planned period will exceed the requirement for at least 3,400 dwellings during the planned period by some 400 or so dwellings. According to my mathematics, that's an excess of about 12%. I think it's about 11.89 or something like that, but you might like to comment on that excess, whether it provides flexibility or whatever. I'll leave that to you. So, Mr. Phillips, please.
Thank you, sir. There was reference made yesterday by Mr. Hollidge to the St Albans case.
Yes.
And its potential impact upon assessed housing needs matters. I also indicated, sir, that in responding to that particular case, we would wish to refer to two others, the Solihull case and the Workington case. All I wondered, sir, was whether you want to deal with that matter at the beginning of this session or you want me to do that in summing up, maybe.
I think it would be useful to deal with it at the beginning. Now, I received the second lot of transcripts, the Wokingham and the Solihull cases at about 5:30 yesterday afternoon. I did have an opportunity of reading through them yesterday evening, but I want to make sure that, as you're most concerned with this, Mr. Holly, did you have time to study them?
I live in Folkestone, and due to traffic congestion, roadworks and an accident on the route home, I didn't get back till nearly 9 o'clock last night. Yeah. I did receive the cases from the Planning Council. Unfortunately, one of them amounts to, I think in total, about 100 pages, and it wasn't reasonable to expect me to read those through. Okay. But there is a series of points I think it's perhaps best to raise now, coming out of that, and perhaps Mr. Phillips might be able to shed some light on. Attached to one of the cases was a letter from the inspector or the programme officer, so Dover District Council, to Mr. Ebbs, Head of Regeneration and Development of Dover District Council. And it's regarding one of those cases, well, it's regarding both of those cases, and it's basically asking the council to consider their position, and if they were not, and to take legal advice, and that if they weren't able to respond to the issues, then the inspector's view was that until the matter is resolved, the consultation on the main modifications should be put on hold. Now, I'm not sure, this letter's dated 15th of May 2014. Now, I'm not sure what has happened since. Obviously, I didn't have a chance to investigate. Whether that public examination has been put on hold, I don't know. And I'm not quite clear whether Mr. Phillips, by sending this to me, is suggesting that we actually put this aspect in terms of housing need figures on hold to be dealt with at a later date. And I'd have to submit on that basis that as I didn't have, the cases they've referred to were not included in the council's original submission. They've not been put online, and therefore my first reaction would be that they should be excluded from this examination. So that's my first point. They should be excluded. My second point is, are the Borough Council suggesting that this section of the public examination be put on hold until these cases are resolved?
Right. I mean, my first reaction is that I am obviously concerned that for very good reason you've not been able to study these cases, and I think it would be very unfair to expect you to comment on them now, and I'm not expecting that. I think there are going to be a number of days during the rest of this hearing where we're going to be pushed for time, and I am expecting, in any event, to come down to Hastings to do a number of site visits in early January. And I think it might be a good idea if we were to keep these cases on hold until then, and then by that time, hopefully you would have had good opportunity to study them and give me your views then.
Yes, that would be welcome, because obviously my clients would like to take legal advice on this. I do have the benefit of holding a law degree, so I can actually comment on, in very brief, I did scan some of them. And it seems to me that the one case that the council have put forward, which is the Gallagher-Holmes case, actually supports the judgment in the St Albans case. The other case, which is the Gladman developments against Wokingham Borough Council, I think is subject to further judicial challenge, so that might well be going to the Court of Appeal anyway. So in relation to that case, I don't think it would be appropriate for anybody to comment on it at this stage while it's been undecided. And in relation to the first case, it's supporting the St Albans decision. In any event, the St Albans decision is a Court of Appeal case, which, as the Inspector might know, outranks High Court cases, so it still be the overriding case by which this public examination will be judged.
Mr Phillips, did you wish to comment on that?
I'm more than happy to comment generally and to respond to Mr Holledge's questions. So, first to his question, I am certainly not suggesting that we suspend the examination or any part or consideration of it by referring to the cases. The fact that there is case law there is something that I would suggest any inspector would be aware of and have due regard to in considering his final report. And in respect of Dover and their response, obviously that is a matter for Dover, and how they responded is largely, I would suggest, irrelevant as to how Hastings would respond. It may be worth pointing out for those people around the table who were not here yesterday that the substance of what Mr Holledge is promoting is that rather than the 3,400 houses that is proposed within the adopted planning strategy, his suggestion is that the Borough Council should be looking to provide of the order of 6,800 houses. So that is the background to where Mr Holledge is coming from. I'm more than happy, sir, to give initial views on those cases, including the St Albans case, which Mr Holledge did refer to and has submitted, and then to make comments generally in respect of how we believe the cases do not damage one iota the process that we are going through on the development management plan.
Well, I think, yes, Mr Holledge.
Yes, if I could just come back on a couple of points. I welcome the suggestion from the Inspector that perhaps this issue in isolation be dealt with in January when you're doing your site inspections. I think it would be inappropriate for the Council to comment on either of these cases. As I said before, they've not made them a part of their submission, so technically they shouldn't be allowed. They've not been on the website, shouldn't be allowed. One of the cases is subject to legal challenge, so you can't draw anything from that. And in relation to the Dover inquiry, I would say it's highly relevant how the Inspector dealt with it there. The Inspector felt that it was such a serious issue that the Council should, that the hearing should be suspended until such time as the Council had formed a view on it. Then I would have thought the Planning Inspectorate in general would take the same approach. Whether it was in Hastings, Dover or anywhere else.
Yes, Mr. Newbold.
Yes, I would like to echo that point that this information hasn't been available. I'd also like to say that are we going to turn this public examination into a legal process? Because it seems by what I've heard so far that we're quoting legal fact. This should have been done prior to the actual examination process, and it should have been done prior to the actual document being put into to you. If we're going to actually have a legal process here, we all should have been represented by legal people, and we should have turned this into a public inquiry.
Mr. Hollidge.
Can I just come back on that? I'm conscious of the fact that many of the people around this table may not be aware particularly of the particular points we're debating on this issue. That's why I suggest that perhaps it is dealt with separately in January, when it would really just be a debate between myself and the council and doesn't need to involve the rest of the inquiry.
Well, I mean, other people will always be invited.
Oh yes, they'll be all invited, but I think to spend a lot of time today debating issues which, as I say, shouldn't be debated at this point in time, will probably be to waste a lot of the people around here's time.
I think the main point that concerns me is that, well, first of all, I mean, as a general principle, I don't want to turn away anything by way of evidence that could help me in coming to the right decisions on these matters. But the point that does concern me most of all is that you, Mr. Hollidge, have simply not had enough time to consider these quite detailed transcripts. And as I say, I've read through them. I would certainly appreciate a bit more time to study them. So I think, Mr. Phillips, is that we will deal with 2.1 as far as we can, but subject to, in all probability, having another session in early January when we can give far more detailed consideration to these transcripts. I do believe that that is the fairest way forward for everybody.
That's fine, sir, and I think that obviously other individuals will be able to access the St Albans case that Mr Hollidge has referred to, and the main thrust of his argument, as I say, which is going to look at the doubling of housing numbers, and we will also make sure that the transcripts from Wokingham and Solihull are available on the website for anybody that wishes to look at those.
Yes, I think also perhaps we could have all three of these transcripts. That's yours, Mr Hollidge, the St Albans case, and the two from the council. Could they be core documents? So there will be hard copies available if anybody wishes to see them. Actually, that does remind me, we looked quite a lot yesterday at the extract on the duty to cooperate from the planning practice guidance. I think it might be a good idea if we had that as a core document as well, so if the necessary arrangements could be made for that. Right, well, anyhow, as I say, I think that's the fairest way forward and the most practicable, quite honestly. So is there anything that can be said about 2.1? I mean, I think while there's so many people here, I do want to give them an opportunity to comment on 2.1. So are there, apart from, I mean, leaving aside the legal transcripts aside for the time being, is there anything that you wish to say further on 2.1, Mr. Phillips?
If I can make a very brief comment before passing to my colleague Kerry Colbert to just emphasise one or 2 points from the Council's submission on housing, and then obviously we are happy to respond to any points that come up in debate. The issue was raised yesterday, sir, as to whether there had been any significant changes in government policy that might affect the plan, and Mrs Cameron responded to that question. Whilst not a significant change, I think the government has clarified recently by its parliamentary statement on the 4th of October, and this is the Government UK website, about the issues of housing generally. And this has been put out in the names of Mr Pickles and also the Planning Minister. And for further information, this guidance is then subdivided, and one of the headlines is saying, do housing and economic needs override constraints on the use of land? And it was referenced as being in respect of green belts, but also in respect of other matters. Now, this parliamentary statement confirms that the National Planning Policy Framework should be read as a whole, and that housing need alone is not the only factor to be considered when drawing up a local plan. It goes on to say that the framework is clear that local authorities should, through their local plans, meet objectively assessed needs unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework when taken as a whole, or where specific policies in the framework indicate that development should be restricted. Now, I think that was put out by the government to clarify concerns that in some quarters, housing need and objectively assessed housing needs assessments were being seen as the be-all and end-all of the local plan process. It goes on to say that assessing need is just the first stage in developing a local plan. The suitability, the likely economic viability of land to meet those needs should also be taken into account. Now, that came out, as I say, very recently, sir, on the 4th of October, and I think it has helped the general debate, some of which we began to stray into yesterday, sir, when I referred to your report on the planning strategy, where at paragraph 53, we confirmed that there was general consensus on what the unconstrained housing need was, and you, sir, used words to the effect that the area of contention was how much and where that could be met. You then, sir, in 54 and 56 of your report, confirmed that you believed that there were sufficient rational reasons in respect of other matters in the National Planning Policy Framework to set a lower number in the planning strategy. So that's all I would want to say on that matter at the moment, sir, without, as you said, straying into any of the various court cases that's been referred to. If I might now hand over to my colleague, Kerry Colbert, to talk to just one or two of the main points within the matter to submission that you have received from the council.
And just before we hear from her, excuse me, the parliamentary statement, I think again it would be very useful to have that as a core document, and if it could be put on the council's website. And then, are we going to say the same thing? Then, of course, you will have the opportunity of, well, in fact, we could then discuss that parliamentary statement when we come back in January.
Yeah, if I could just make a quick point. I think Mr. Phillips is actually, what he's saying is actually supporting the main thrust of my argument, that the objectively assessed housing needs aren't the be-all and end-all of a local plan, but they do have to be objectively assessed. Whether the council is then able to meet those figures is not uncommon in many of the areas that I deal with, that they can't, and there are good reasons for that, and then it comes down to a case-by-case view when you look at a site as to what the benefits are. The housing need figure is a starting point, but it doesn't mean that it has to be met. I say I deal with many local planning authorities, and I think it's very rare that it is met. So I think that Mr. Phillips is actually, to a certain extent, concurring with my argument on that. I don't want to go into the detail at the moment. It is clear from the planning strategy, where I did raise objections on the housing need figures, that you cannot consider them as a constrained figure, and that's quite clear from the St Albans case, where they have clarified the NPPF on that point, and it is quite clear that it has to be an unconstrained figure to start with, that you can't have a constrained figure as your housing need figure. Say whether your land supply meets that figure is a different matter altogether, but you cannot have an unconstrained figure.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we will look at that in more detail when we study the transcripts and we have this parliamentary statement before us sometime in January. So thank you for that. So, yes.
I think I just wanted to emphasise at this point that given what we know about what development has already taken place within the plan period, what developments are currently under construction, looking to the future, we can see that in terms of the number of sites we are hoping to see allocated in the development management plan, together with a projection for small site windfall developments, we are confident at the moment that the evidence we have suggests that we will meet the planning strategy requirement for 3,400 net new homes by 2028 and hopefully exceed that. And the excess that I've identified in my para 2.1.2 is necessary to give us the flexibility around delivery.
I see, yes. It is about 12%, isn't it, I think? Looks about right. I mean, do you think that 12% excess, besides giving, or could it give flexibility and perhaps support a case for the deletion of one or two proposed allocations? This is music to your ears, isn't it, Mr. Newbar?
It is, yes.
I think I'd be. I feel that the buffer that we appear to have at the moment against the housing target. Yes, there is flexibility there. My concern is that, and we'll be discussing this later under your Matter 5 questions, is that we need to take account, we need to be alert to and be aware that delivery on allocated sites could be less than hoped for, could be delayed during the course of the plan period. So I even though the 12% appears good, I think what we know about windfall delivery, what we know about the potential for further large site windfall delivery, perhaps gives us some flexibility.
Right, yes. I mean, presumably another consideration is on each of these proposed allocations, you've suggested a possible number of dwellings. I mean, presumably taken as a whole, it may be more or less than depending on site layouts, densities, etc. So we have to bear that in mind as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else at this stage from the council? No? Right, yes, Mr. Hollidge.
I'm just going to refer back to your comments just now, and I'll welcome perhaps that approach. From my client's point of view, we did try and have a discussion with the council about reaching a position of common ground. And we again had another conversation this morning, and just to throw something out to the audience, my suggestion was that, much along the lines that you just suggested, that there is flexibility to take out some of the allocations, and I refer to Speckled Wood, and I refer to the site at Rawsack, and then to include my client's land. And I think everybody around the table would be more than happy if that were to occur.
Okay, well, I'll take comment on that. Thank you. Right, yes, Mr. Newbold.
Yeah, I would just like to say that is very welcome news, that there is a 12% buffer zone. And it would be very helpful if that could be allocated to specific sites to remove them.
Any in particular?
Do I need to say? Yes, probably Rawsack and Speckled Wood.
Yes, Mr. Keeley.
Are we still using this system of putting these
I
up?
think that yes. Thank you for reminding everybody. Yes.
Right.
So we've been using hands.
Yeah, wave the other too close. Yes, I don't think we can get 3,400 houses in allocated sites. And as I said when I started, I've been to all these examinations, and we started actually with Wilden when Mr. Phillips recalled I was there. And Wilden in front of the rest, and they've already started. If you go to Helsham, Heading Line, and see what awful housing is being crammed in, creating debt with mortgages they can't pay and rents they can't pay, and looking out into open space. I went to a conference the other day in London when they was talking about well-being and open space and creating walks and a bit of countryside within these estates is important. In Helsham, you look out of your, not be unkind to the ladies, but about 90% of the women spend an awful lot of time in the kitchen looking out of a window into another wall. And talk about depression that's going to creep in because developers and the infrastructure, or the developers are saying, the councils are saying, you must build this housing. I went to near that. And I think cramming 3,000 houses in Hastings is going to create the same issue. Now, I think in Sussex we're talking about building 27,000 houses between now and 2028 or something, of which there's 12,000 actually on the waiting list. So we need 12,000, not 27,000. And this morning, I've actually come from Mercer Zoo. It's taken me an hour. And if you look at the radio every morning, the traffic congestion in the county now, and we've already started building houses, is going to be terrific. And I think that is an issue. I actually have emailed the council, the county council last week, but I've been in Wales this week, so I haven't seen response, to say we ought to re-examine this and get all the district council planning officers or the chief executives together to say, are we really going to, is this the right path to take to build all these houses? And if you wind the clock on to 2027, then what? Do we do it again and import some more people to fill them up? I mean, we are going to be in a critical situation, and I think we ought to look at all these district council plans as a whole and say, looking what we've got now with the traffic and the employment we talked about another time. So I'm thinking we don't need 27,000 houses, we need 12, and we certainly don't need 3,500 in Hastings. And if you look at the Wilden as an example, if that's what's coming, we are in for a disaster.
Okay, thank you. Can I just go to the other bit, and I will come back to it. Yeah. So, yes, Mr. Wise.
Well, sir, yesterday we listened to Mr. Phillips and Mrs. Cameron explaining and elaborating how the national housing policies work and where those policies should be applied. They only viewed the situation in a paper storm environment, not with a view of how our historic town could grow in any realistic terms, being a coastal town bulging with history, some properties built in the 1600s, buildings of character. The council officers are taking the wrong approach. We have to fit any new built environment around our interesting Victorian heritage. Narrow, congested roads, the total lack of interest of any really large manufacturing company coming to a one-sided town far from the industrial Midlands. Yesterday we were told that a company had employed 300 new staffs that are recruited from a population of 110,000 residents plus. Peanuts. We must wake up to reality. The Victorians built on the best bits, and the infrastructure was designed for a population of around a maximum of 50,000 people, allied to the railway network for distant travel. Tourism and the sea is the town's greatest attraction. Fishing, angling parties for sea fishing around the many wrecks out in the Channel waters. Let's wake up and stop fiddling with paper chains. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Hobbage.
Yeah, I can just come back on some of the points that the gentleman to the right of me made. He was talking about high rents and high values. In this country we have a chronic housing shortage. We're supposed to be building 250,000 homes a year, yet at the moment we're delivering half of that. And that has been greatly exacerbated by the severe depression the country's been through in the last few years. Rents and values are a function of supply. If we don't supply the houses, rents and values will go up, and also as a consequence we will be having to cram more houses onto smaller sites and increasing the densities, which goes back to the back-to-back situation when you're looking out on a brick wall just to try and get housing numbers. And I think just as a comparison, I just did some brief figures last night. I'm doing a lot of work in the Maidstone area at the moment. Same census figures of 2011 suggest Hastings has a population of 86,900. Maidstone has a population of 113,137, which means that Hastings' population is roughly 77% of that of Maidstone. Yet Maidstone have been asked to provide over 20,000 homes. If that was applied to Hastings, we'd be looking near a number of 15,400 homes, rather than the paltry 3,000 odd that's been suggested to date.
Thank you. Yes, Ms Jarvis.
That ignores the density of Hastings, the population density. I mean, for example, Central St Leonard's is extremely densely populated. It's 31.75% more densely populated than any other ward in East Sussex, with a density of 105 persons per hectare. And and also its heritage, particularly in Central St Leonard's, which is the most deprived, also the most deprived borough ward in East Sussex, it's extremely important because it needs to. More tourists and visitors need to be attracted in order to regenerate the place. And with the new pier coming and everything else, it would be a shame to spoil the historic environment just at this particular time. St Leonard's Warrior Square Station is a wonderful historic station to arrive at, and to have built multi-storey blocks in the midst. Right. Sorry, but that's just a general point about.
Thank you. Yes, Mr Ingleton.
I made all these points yesterday. What's happened is that we have got a small area, land area in Hastings, of 12 square miles. So we have a hilly area, we have a poor infrastructure. But if you compare some of the other towns that around the area, their land square miles are Lewes 113, Sevenoaks 142, Tunbridge Wells 128. And so we have a very small area to pack a lot of people in. So the numbers of people that live here are incredible. And we are the highest borough in East Sussex, and probably the whole of South East, and the density of people in the area. I made this point before. About 170,000 people live in Hastings and Rother. Half the population live in Hastings and St Leonard's. A quarter live in Bexhill and 1/4 in Rother. We are not an area that you can actually pack properties into. The facts that I made yesterday are that we have 30.4 people per hectare, and that figure for the whole of East Sussex is 3.1, and the figure of the South East is 4.5. So we have a constrained area with a large population being squeezed in there with very little sites to build on. Thank you.
Yes, Mr Newbold.
Yes, I'd like to say we're aware that the council has a very good policy on rebuilding on existing sites. This is actually
Sorry,
quite.
can we just have one at a time?
This is very useful because of our borough's very tight infrastructure. One of the things that is concerning about this whole debate on numbers is that the numbers of these sites which are being redeveloped are not being allowed into this discussion. And I think that's quite important that because our borough is so small and we have such packed housing, this redevelopment is a keen issue on housing, and it should be part of this debate, and the statistics that come from that should be brought into this as well.
Isn't that, well, I'll ask the council about that, but I mean, I would have thought any redevelopment is probably taken up or accounted for
I understand that
in windfalls, but I'll ask the council.
I understand that the figures are not allowed or to be took off of the statistic that is for the housing, and I find that kind of regular.
Well, okay. Yes, Mr. Hollidge.
Yes, just to answer some of the points raised there. I mean, I was referring to densities when I was talking about population figures for Hastings and Maidstone. And I don't wish to denigrate the views of the people around the table, but I deal with many local authority areas, and so my view is more objective, if you like. Hastings...
well, no, Mr. Hollidge, everybody here is of equal importance.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying they've obviously got very strong views about their town, but all other towns throughout the country have similar constraints, similar heritages. Hastings has, they're very true in what they say, but it's not an uncommon problem, and other local authorities are rising to that challenge to provide the significant numbers of housing that this country needs.
No, Mr. Wise, please do not interrupt.
And the last point was, I don't want to get fixated on housing need when I've said before that housing need is a starting point. It's not the be-all and end-all. If then the council looks at cannot supply the relevant land to meet those figures, then as with every site, it's looked at on its merits. If they can't reach those figures, it's not necessarily a problem. Many local authorities throughout the country can't reach their housing need requirement figures, and it doesn't dictate everything. That when you look at particular sites that are brought forward for planning applications, there's various constraints in relation to those sites, whether it be environmental, infrastructure, and the rest of it will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Let's not get fixated on the housing need, because it is one part of the equation.
Okay, right. I mean, we did look at this housing need and housing requirements in the examination of the planning strategy, as you'll recall. But yes, Mr. Keeley.
To go back on what Mr. Hollidge mentioned, the market. Do we have to have the market all the time? If we were to say we need 12,000 houses or whatever we need in Sussex or East Sussex, whatever it is, which is on the waiting list, we could build 12,000 council houses, and they'd be, for developers, we invited to build the houses, which they'd cost probably about £80,000-90,000 to do. The market doesn't have to come into the equation every time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. If I could just come back on that point, it's not the market that's dictating the housing needs requirements, it's the needs of the people of this country to have somewhere to live that dictates those figures. And if I can just come back on a slightly another point, we talked yesterday a lot about the duty to cooperate across the board, and I have a lot of sympathy with the residents of Hastings in that Rother District Council, which surrounds the borough, does have ample land, and I think that there is a question mark as to how much the two councils have cooperated, because Rother could take a lot more housing numbers to ease the burden on Hastings.
Okay. Right, yes, Mr. Newbold, and then I'll ask the council.
Yes, I would agree that is one line approach that should have been taken, is that we should have gone outside of the borough to see if there were any potential housing sites on the border between Rother, and I'm not aware of how much conversation has gone to actually try and do that. In fact, I did put in my statement to you one of the sites which is being put up for industrial use, which could have equally been used for residential use to offset the amount of housing. That I don't know why that's not in this plan either. I think, to be honest, that what we're hearing is that, from what you said yesterday as well, there is a definite need to actually look at these sites on an individual basis to actually decide whether they're actually viable and to see what figure we actually come up with. I don't see how you can have a total figure and fit it into a plan if you don't know how much space you've actually got in the first place. And I think that's very important, that this is led by the individual sites rather than the actual need, which is a figure which is some insurmountable figure which seems to change daily. We hear 1,200 today, we hear 3,400 today, we hear 6,000 from this. I mean, what is the correct number?
Well, it's 3,400, which is in the planning strategy.
Right, but that is changed 3 times today, hasn't it?
Well, it hasn't changed the figure in the adopted planning strategy.
Right.
Yes, Mr. Phillips, and also we certainly will be looking at each individual site as we move through the examination. But if you have any initial comments at this stage on the prospect of developing Barley Lane and not developing Robsack A and Speckled Wood, if you're able to, as I say, give any initial comments on that, subject to our more detailed consideration later.
Certainly, sir. And in a sense, I think it is helpful to see that there are some significantly polarised views about how many houses can or should be fitted into the borough, when we have very eloquently addressed yesterday concerns from Mr. Ingleton and Mr. Wise that this 3,400 figure is far too many. Mr. Hollidge certainly batting for a figure of double that. And I think that is generally the situation, as I say, that a plan is endeavouring to resolve. With regards to Mr. Hollidge's initial comment about is there flexibility to take out, for example, the Speckled Wood and Robsack sites and substitute his clients, I think, sir, you will first of all be aware that the indicative capacities for the Speckled Wood sites and the Robsack one are quite in excess of the numbers that might be provided on the Barley Lane site, and obviously you have already assured Mr. Hollidge that you will be visiting that site. Yeah. With regards to the suitability of the Barley Lane site, you'll be aware, sir, that within the policies plan it is clearly shown and designated as a local wildlife site. When we get to matter 5 as well, sir, and indeed when you get to the site, you will see, without being too flippant, there are parts of the site that I would not go on without crampons. It is incredibly steep. The topography of it is quite difficult. There is also correspondence from the development management staff over the years that have indicated problems of land instability in that area. And furthermore, sir, it was drawn to Mr. Hollidge's attention as far back as 2009 that there would quite likely be highways issues. You will be able, from your site visits, sir, to undertake your own judgments in respect of potential access from Barley Lane. So that was the first point raised by Mr. Hollidge, but in response to your question about substitutions. In respect to Mr. Keeley's comments, he was basically talking about the fact of his belief that we cannot simply cram in 3,400. Well, obviously, Mr. Keeley has been a very keen follower of all of the core strategies in the county, and will be aware that that is the figure in the adopted strategy. And the task of the development management plan, and indeed your examination, is to see whether that plan is able to deliver that strategy and in compliance with the generality of all of the other issues that the framework requires of us. Mr. Wise, again, has mentioned the nature of the town, the very specific nature. I think it is probably fair to say that across the country we have possibly all been sitting on our Victorian laurels when it comes to infrastructure provision. And that is why, sir, in more recent years, the councils, in preparing plans, have been required to produce an infrastructure delivery plan and to engage with those bodies so that they are clearly aware of the scale of development that might be coming and so that they can plan for it. And that goes for all providers, whether it be education, health services, transport. Mr. Wise did make some good comments yesterday about health service provision and education. All I would say, sir, is that the Borough Council isn't obviously responsible for the provision of those services, but we do liaise with the providers of those and consult with them on the plan. Mr. Hollidge talked about the chronic housing shortage, and certainly there have been some headline figures in the national papers regarding his figure, which is correct, that 250,000 needed, and building at not that rate for a number of years across many areas. He talked about values being a function of supply. In fairness, I think quite often it is the value of the land that is the biggest function of supply, and many governments over many years have wrestled with that issue as to whether or not there could be some cap on that in order to make the provision of homes genuinely more affordable, such as Mr. Keeley has referenced. And there are initiatives being looked at now in terms of community land trusts and others to try to get over that problem. Mrs. Jarvis again eloquently reaffirmed points that she made at the pre-hearing meeting, that part and parcel of the framework requires us not just to look at housing needs, but also heritage and natural environmental assets, in seeing whether and to what degree we are able to meet and deliver that at least 3,400 figure that is within the adopted strategy. Mr. Ingleton reaffirmed some of those points, sir, and again I think it is just to confirm the absolute gulf between what some individuals believe that the town can take and what other individuals such as Mr. Hollidge believe that it should take. Mr. Newbold referenced, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure he will, I think he was almost complimenting us on having a good policy in respect of brownfield or previously developed land, and I will ask my colleague in a minute to comment a little bit on that if I may. Mr. Hollidge did then stray somewhat into suggesting he had a more objective view, and you did correct him on that, sir. I would have to say that in my experience, many developers will always promote the idea that they are absolutely bursting to provide much needed affordable homes for people. It does usually happen to be on their land, and they are arguing that their land is much better than anybody else's. You will see from your site inspection, and when we get to matter 5, sir, and be able to make your own judgments between the sites allocated in the development plan and those that have been omitted. The references that were subsequently made, I think, by Mr. Newbold in terms of the various figures that we have to provide. The inspector has clearly identified the figure in the adopted planning strategy. I think that Kerry Colbert was indicating in the statement that with what we are delivering and anticipate delivering, it could be something in excess of that by a figure of about 12%. So that was where that discrepancy in the figure came from. The figure of 6,800 odd has come from Mr. Hollidge. I think that in that sense, and finally before I pass to Kerry Colbert, and it was in response to Mr. Newbold saying that the plan has been led purely by the numbers, that is not correct. The plan is led by what the planning strategy is requiring us to provide. We have looked and assessed very carefully across the whole of the borough those sites that we feel are capable in accommodating that provision, and we believe we have chosen the most appropriate ones to deliver that strategy figure of 3,400. So the sites have been looked at carefully, sir, the topography and the capacities of them, in order to produce a plan that we believe is in alignment with the strategy. If I may conclude, sir, by just asking Kerry Colbert to comment on the draft.
Thank you. I want to hear from the council, and then I'll come back to you.
Yes,
Sorry,
I'd just like to confirm that we do have a good track record on brownfield delivery. In terms of the sites that are proposed in the development management plan, if all of those sites were to be realised over the plan period, it would mean that 75% of new homes would be in fact delivered on brownfield sites. And in terms of windfall allowance, the windfall allowance is always arising from brownfield opportunities, chiefly in terms of small site windfalls. Typical opportunities that arise are the subdivision and conversion of buildings and change of use, for example.
I think the planning strategy, if I recall it, is looking at an average of about 35 new homes coming forward every year net as a result of windfalls.
That's correct.
Yeah. Right, yes. Unless there's anything further from the council at this point, I think I'll go around this way this time.
Thank you very much. I feel I need to challenge what Mr. Phillips just said about finding the sites to fit in with the planning strategy, because if anything was against what he just said, it has to be the vision for West Hill, which you challenged, and we were going to discuss in December the 2nd, I think. 50 to 60 dwellings on West Hill is totally and absolutely impractical. There is nowhere to put them. In fact, the council actually goes against its strategy in that respect. On page 180, paragraph 6246. And it actually says that there are few opportunities for new development, and the densely packed terraces would make this difficult. And it goes on to talk about the only hope of achieving anything like this, presumably that's what's being said here, is the reuse of existing buildings. Now, I would like to ask how many existing buildings have been reused in the last 15 years, because it certainly couldn't have been anything like even half, even 30, I should think, in the whole borough. So I think it's utterly and absolutely impractical to talk about 60 to 80 dwellings on the West Hill. And if it's impractical to achieve this, I ask how much more impractical it is to achieve a lot of the other aims in this plan. Because I mean, we can talk at length, can't we, about the bits of green that are there, and hopefully they're still sacrosanct. That's why it's being said that there has to be reuse of existing buildings in order to achieve the objective. But we can talk about the castle, we can talk about the West Hill itself, 2 allotment sites in Collier Road and Benbrook Road, and that's the green space up there. So if those are not to be intruded on, where are we going to get 60 to 80 new dwellings?
Well, we will be looking at that focus area in some detail later on, but thank you for putting a marker down on that. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ingleton.
One of the problems with Hastings is that we have a huge number of empty homes. So what we have is a deprived area. Over shops and various areas, there are empty homes. And we've got a reasonable record of bringing some of them back into use. But what ought to happen, really, this number ought to count against the 3,400 in the local plan. I know you said it shouldn't, but because of the uniqueness of Hastings, it ought to be considered.
I think the point that was made at this planning strategy was that an empty home is part of the existing stock. So it's not really a...
It's not used,
no, it's not used, no. Yes. Mr. Jones.
Good morning, sir. I was wondering, can I comment on 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 all together just as one brief thing, or do I need to comment separately on all three?
No, if it's...
a point that covers all three.
Yes, I mean, we're dealing with 2.1 in its entirety, which goes down to 2.12.
But my comments cover 2.2 and 2.3 as well. Can I say them once, or do I need to repeat them?
I think if you can confine your initial remarks to 2.1, and
it will be the same thing. Will apply to that.
Oh, okay. Yes. All right then. Yes.
The council continue to fail to meet their target numbers of houses completed stroke started, as evidenced by the latest Table 253A house building, permanent buildings started and completed by tenure and district. As can be seen from the table, 80 permanent dwellings were completed in 2012-13 and 70 completed in 2013-14, which is 3 times 20 and 1 times 10 in the quarter. 30 dwellings were completed in June quarter of 2014 and 30 started in that quarter, with only 10 started in each of the 2 previous quarters, which predicts there will be a drop in completions in the current quarter. I ask that the 12% be allocated to the past undersupply, and would comment that windfalls are not always arising on brownfield sites, as garden land is no longer classified as brownfield land.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Holdridge.
Yes, perhaps if I could come back on some of the points Mr. Phillips has raised. I know we're having a further session in January and we'll be looking at my client's site under focus area 12. But as he's raised the issues, I feel it appropriate to address them now. He talked about instability on my client's land, and as part of my submission, you will see that actually the instability that is claimed there is due to the failure of the Hastings Borough Council to honour the legal obligations within the land sale when they sold the land to maintain a retaining wall there. That's what caused the landslip.
Right.
There's no instability on the site. So.
Right. I mean, can I ask you to be brief on the undertaking that we will be looking at this site?
It's only because Mr. Phillips raised
fair enough. Yeah, but he was brief. I'm asking you to be brief.
And the second point about the slope. I think I raised this question yesterday and again reared its head yesterday. I was inundated with phone calls from the contractors, the grounds contractors that are on site at the moment. There has been further people from the council attending, or claiming to be from the council attending on the site. Obviously they have no problem getting on there in terms of the slope to protest against work that's being legally carried out. In terms of the planning position, I mean, this site has been a housing allocation since the Borough Council sold the land for housing in 1973. It's been a housing allocation for over 30 years, until 2004. In my submission, I list some of the planning permissions that have been granted on the site. I think they total 11. There's plenty more that I didn't refer to. The council have clearly not had a problem considering this site as a housing allocation. And evidenced by the fact that it has been so for 30 years and the number of consents they've previously granted. So how they can now try and justify the fact that it's not suitable for housing simply beggars belief. In terms of something that somebody else raised, I think it might have been Mr. Phillips, I'm not sure, talking about values of housing and land and the economic supply. The problem is with land supply that yes, land values can be high, and that is also a function of the supply of land. If there's more land available, those land values go down, and consequently house prices go down. Also, in terms of affordable housing, we can go on. I'm not sure where we're dealing with this in the. It might be under Matter 5 in terms of the affordable strategy. There is a strategy to provide affordable homes in relation to sites which are coming forward, and those houses cannot be provided, those affordable houses cannot be provided. The affordable strategy doesn't make sense at the moment, but if you restrict land supply, you're going to get less affordable housing. And just the other quick point was in relation to the planning strategy and the figures contained in there. As I said yesterday, the planning strategy and the development management plan really should be seen as one document working hand in hand. Unfortunately, we have a situation where they've been considered separately, but they should still work hand in hand. And it shouldn't be, there shouldn't be this fixation on housing needs figures, as I said before. therefore that's just one part of it. But the council can supply the site is another matter. But the council's policy is that they try and satisfy those figures, and they don't need to, because as I alluded to earlier, there are many planning authorities throughout the country they cannot meet the target figures, and it's not an issue. The council don't need to meet the target in terms of land supply, whether it's 3,000, whether it's 6,000, or whether it's 15,000 I alluded to earlier. We simply don't need to meet that, and I think we're sort of this examination has been diverted slightly in that sense that I think we should move away from what those housing need figures are, which will be subject to further debate in January, and just say that each site should be looked at on its merits. And finally, if I can just come back to the question that the inspector originally asked of Mr. Phillips, which he didn't answer, and that was, is the flexibility to take out the raw sack site, to take out the speckled wood site, to put in my client's site, and then most of the people around this table would be very happy, and we wouldn't need to have 3-week public examination.
I won't be.
Sorry?
I said I won't be very happy if the speckled wood is taken out of the
Okay,
right?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Newbold has been waiting for some time.
Yes, we heard yesterday and today about the uniqueness of Hastings, and I think this is one of the things that does need to be taken into account in this examination. Certainly there is limited space to actually put houses, we've heard that. We've heard from Mr. Ingleton that there are houses which actually are not being used, which I believe also should be taken into this thing. I do not see how a house is empty can be part of an allocation stock if it's not being allocated. It's a nonsense. In addition to that, there was an important point that was made yesterday in yesterday's meeting regarding 5 SNCI sites which have been removed, their status have been removed, and they've been deallocated.
Yeah, can I ask you to keep to the question 2.1?
What it is, it's in response to my learned gentleman here. He made a point that they had done thorough investigation into some of these sites. If you're looking at SNCI sites and you are changing them to non-SNCI sites, which is something that only Natural England can actually do, it seems not the correct process. Again, and we're coming back into procedural matters, aren't we?
Well, I think I'm trying to concentrate people's attention on 2.1 and the answer to the question put there. Mrs. Brown, you wanted to say
Thank you, sir. Affordable housing has been mentioned. Am I able to make a comment about that?
There is a question on affordable housing later on.
Thank you.
So, I would like to draw this discussion on 2.1 to an end fairly quickly. Yes, Mr. Jarvis.
About empty homes, I do think they should. It would be a good idea to include them as part of the allocation, because once again, Central St Leonard's, but it's extremely densely populated, but it also has a high level of empty homes. So that could contribute to the overall housing. I mean, I know it exists, so it's there, but there's a lot of scope.
Yes, Mr. Hollidge.
Before we leave this point, as I just mentioned, I'd like to ask Mr. Phillips again, and alluding to your earlier suggestion, are the council prepared to take out the allocations on raw sack and speckled wood and include the allocation on my clients?
It wasn't to be fair, it wasn't a suggestion.
No,
I really
it's
asked
a comment.
As a comment, yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
I haven't left it up from last time. Comment on a few comments, really. I know we've got 4 beds in Asia, but some developers are asked to build 35 or 40% affordable housing. Then 6 months later put an application in to overlook it, say it's not practical or something, and we need to be very wary of that. In fact, as far as affordable housing is concerned, there shouldn't be anything else, really, especially in Hastings. The lady said 75% of the brownfields, the development area could be brownfield sites. We have to recall that most of our brownfield sites used to be workplaces, and we are closing that industry to build houses on brownfield sites, and that's something you should be looking at that. And as far as land supply, I mean, as Mr. Phillips has spoken before, and the agricultural land can go from £20,000 an hectare to £500,000 plus with development planning permission, and that is something that should be addressed. So the land is an issue, but it shouldn't be an issue. We need to look at that land pricing in the future. I think it's something we ought to debate, not now, but it's something we ought to put on the agenda sometime.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Phillips.
And this is specifically to Mr. Hollige's question of me.
Yes, and if you wanted to take up any of the other points which people have made.
Right, okay, so certainly in terms of the general comment from Mr. Newbold about the uniqueness of the borough, we have, I believe, endeavoured to do that within the development management plan. We acknowledge in the plan all of those heritage assets. We acknowledge support for the tourism that Mrs. Jarvis has mentioned. We also acknowledge the natural and environmental assets. We do have to acknowledge our housing need, and we do have to show how we are endeavouring to meet that as best we can. I think that the reference, just as it was made, to the so-called removal of SNCIs, Mr. Murray Davidson will address that in matter 4, sir. And coming back to Mr. Hollige's very specific, could we substitute his client's land for it's Rob Sack with a B, sir?
Yes.
Mr. Hollige will be aware, because at the time we were also copying information via email to the programme officer. We were endeavouring to see if we could agree a statement of common ground. And Mr. Hollige put to me, if you allocate my client's land for housing, I'm happy to withdraw from the examination. Now, broadly speaking, sir, it is your decision as to whether you think these sites should stay in or remain, and his suggestion to my professional view wholly demeans the purpose of this examination, and where everybody's site and all of the issues raised need to be fairly and openly considered. And I advised him so, and that it was not for myself as an officer or indeed any individual member to come to that decision. It was a matter for this examination.
Okay. Right.
Trying to suggest compromise.
Right. Well, look, I think that does bring us to the end of our discussion on 2.1. It's a suitable time. Sorry?
That's an hour and a quarter.
It's a suitable time for a mid-morning break. So I will adjourn the hearing until 25 minutes past 11 by that clock. A lot today, Mr. about the uniqueness of Hastings and St Leonard's, and I would like to assure everybody that I am well aware of its uniqueness. I mean, can I just refer you to, for example, paragraph 56 in my planning strategy report, where I've looked at a number of assets, constraints, whichever way you look at them, and I said these constraints are valuable assets which give the borough its unique charm, character and appeal. I hope that satisfies you, that I am aware of the uniqueness. I mean, I've even referred to the English Channel as an environmental attraction and said that it probably provides little prospect of providing land for development. So, that's meant to be a joke. Eventually I got a laugh. Right, yes, Mrs. Brown, I understand from the Programme Office that you have a query that you'd like to raise at this point.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, sir. I'd just like your ruling on the following. Situation has arisen in respect of Cornwallis Street car park, which is focus area 8, which we are discussing later in December.
Yes.
However, in support of the point I wish to make then, the local residents association have got a petition, and they have inadvertently given it to the planning department. Is it possible that I can get it from them and that you will allow it to be taken into account?
I mean, was the petition, was it submitted to whoever during the period of consultation on the development management plan, do you know?
No, it wasn't, because it wasn't ready then.
It wasn't ready, right. Are you aware of this petition, Mr. Phillips?
Yes, it was received at the Borough Council offices at Attica House, and we immediately handed it to Lynette as the programme officer.
Right.
We have made no decision whatever. It appeared to come in, obviously, quite some considerable time after representation.
Right. Yes. I mean, it's. I mean, what is your? Would you raise any objection to my accepting it?
No, sir, I don't think we would. We've endeavoured to address the Cornwallis car park in matter 5. It was a petition, I think, of about 20 signatures.
40, I think.
40. We've handed it to the programme officer, and it's basically your decision ultimately, sir, but just to confirm, we would not raise objection on that.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't like it to be taken as a precedent because, I mean, these deadlines are important, but as an exception, I will accept it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Right, good. So if we can move on to 2.2, how much of the land, of the housing land, is deliverable, i.e. available now, offers a suitable location for development now, and be achievable with a realistic prospect that housing will be delivered on the site or the sites within 5 years, and in particular that their development is viable, and how much land is developable, i.e. in a suitable location for housing development with a reasonable prospect that it is available and could be developed at particular points during the plan period. I mean, again, we will be looking at each individual site when these points will be raised, but if we could keep to the generality as far as possible in dealing with this, with obviously without prejudice to what might be discussed on each and every site. So again, can I ask the council if they wish to amplify their response in the light of representations received? Yes.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to confirm that we do indeed have a 5-year housing land supply, and we believe we have sufficient sites to meet the overall housing target to the end of the plan period. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague Adrian Kerrison here, who has independently assessed the viability of all the sites that we've put forward, both in terms of what we believe to be deliverable over the 5-year period and beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, we have undertaken a viability assessment, both in terms, if you like, of a generic viability assessment of housing scenarios and employment scenarios, and then some site-specific work on all the allocated sites over a 0 to 5, 6 to 10, and 11 to 15 year planning period. Following effectively the guidance in the NPPF, particularly paragraph 173, ensuring competitive return to both landowner and developer, and following, if you like, the best practice guidance in the Harbour Report, viability testing local plans, making sure that we properly account for planning policy cost impacts, those being, if you like, the sustainable construction policies of the council, which is set out in our report, which I'm sure you've seen, an allowance for ongoing planning obligations, and the full impact of the council's affordable housing policies. And we've concluded that the vast majority of the allocated sites are viable and deliverable in their planned periods, in particular the 0 to 5 year housing supply.
Can I just, you said the vast majority are deliverable. I mean, does that mean that there's a minority which are not deliverable?
There is, I think, about 3 sites that did show negative viability in the tests. One of those in the 5-year housing supply. I can illustrate, I suppose, whilst the tests show marginal non-viability, in reality and in practical terms they would be viable. The only reason they're shown to be non-viable is the level, if you like, of abnormal cost associated with their development, which in the real world would come off the site price and therefore the land value allowance, and therefore make them viable.
Right. I mean, I'm sure those 3 sites we will be looking at.
Yes,
Can you tell me what they are at present?
I think one is FB2, primary.
FB2, which one is that?
Primary school in the 0 to 5 year land supply.
Primary school at...
Probably best actually, I don't know the sites as well as the council and
It's the former West St Leonard's Primary School.
Westlands Primary.
West St Leonard's Primary.
West St Leonard's, right. And that was FD2. What was the second one?
From memory, I think it was HOV1, HOV2.
HOV1 and HOV2, and which I've got the
which I believe we're coming on to in the matters
right
in December.
Yes, but as far as it would seem at present that it's FB2 and HOV1 and HOV2.
Yes, sir.
So that's a marker for looking at them. Yes, okay. Just a moment, Mr. Newell. Is there anything further from the council at this point by way of amplification? No? Right, okay. I'll go around this way this time. Mr. Newell.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it's interesting to hear that the council says that they have looked at these sites again, and we welcome any chance that they have looked at it. My concern is that I do not believe information is coming into the situation freely enough. I do point to a report which is in our exhibits 216360, which is from a leading knotweed supplier, which was asked to be located from them in September 2014, and that clearly shows a huge amount of an invasive species on the site in Speckled Wood. This surely is a huge potential for cost, and the costs involved in this are astronomical. We are talking about £500,000. This really doesn't equate well with the cost of housing in a particular site. When you envisage there is 50 houses going in there, the return is just not worth it.
As I say, we'll deal with that in more detail when we look at that particular
but
site.
on a broader situation, these reports are all coming in very late. This is a Japanese knotweed thing. It's coming in September. This is after your plan has actually gone in. All this work should have been done before.
So, which document is that in?
This is exhibit REP 216360.
So that's in your report?
It is, yes.
Yes, but I mean, your report was handed in on time.
It was,
so
yes.
I can take it into account?
Yes, you can, yes.
Well, that's fine, sure.
But the point I'm trying to make is that this should have been in the main development management plan, and it isn't.
But you've provided it for me. You've provided it for me on time, for which I'm grateful. Okay. So I will take it into account.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Hollidge.
Yes, I'd just like to raise 3 points. Talking about non-viable sites or viability studies, and I'd just like to draw the attention of the inspector to the fact that this is only being carried out on allocated sites, i.e. it appears from what the council is saying, they've not carried out viability studies on other sites that have been put forward that were not subsequently allocated, and that seems to me to be a huge error on the part of the council. He also referred to abnormal costs being not included in that liability. Well, as a valuer myself, I don't think you're going to take that approach. It's not always the case that abnormal costs are deducted from land values, and that would suggest to me that these sites, if they're coming out as non-viable at the moment, will be non-viable in the future. Going on to the particular sites that he mentioned or didn't mention, I find it rather unusual that as they've been commissioned by the council to carry out these studies, that he can't tell us exactly which ones they are other than the FB2 site. I think everybody around this table would like to know which ones HOV1 and HOV2 are. And then to pick up the point Mr. Newell's made about Japanese knotweed, he's perfectly right. In fact, I was listening to a program on Radio 4 today where they're actually talking about Japanese knotweed and the new legislation that's come in, which means that landowners have to take account of the costs of removing this, otherwise they'll be liable to prosecution. So it does have to be factored into the viability studies where you have an invasive species such as this, which is actually referred to as contamination as much as anything. So yeah, if we could identify those sites.
Yeah, I've got them. Yeah, I've got them here. HOV1, that's the former Stills factory in the Ore Valley, and HOV2 is Ore Valley. Yeah, with the first one, HOV1, is possible net capacity of 75 dwellings, and HOV2 Ore Valley, possible net capacity of 50 dwellings.
And the smaller.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
If I could just quickly quickly come back on the sites in the Ore Valley, because in a past position I've done a lot of work in the Ore Valley, and I can probably tell you that land values are fairly negligible in the Ore Valley, and I would suggest that it's highly unlikely that those sites would be viable at any stage within this plan period.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Pickler.
Yes, I thought I'd say something.
Good.
I'd just like to know from Adrian Kirison, in terms of the viability assessment, can he confirm or otherwise whether that assessment assumed the constraints that will be imposed by policy DM3, in particular in relation to minimum internal floor space standards and, for that matter, minimum rear garden lengths?
Right. Can I? Yes,
it's a point we're coming on to. But
yes, I know. Yeah, thank you. But come back to you in a minute. Yes, Mr. Wise.
The council haven't taken into consideration FB13. It's the garden centre that has a 15 years lease yet to go, and yet on here is put down as a development site. FB13. Right. That's just one example.
Okay. Sorry. Right. Okay. Mrs. Brown.
Thank you. I was just a bit curious about the comment over there in respect of Western End school site, because is it not now out for consultation? So how is it going to take that long to develop it? It's supposed to be fitting into 2.2, where it's not going to be developable within 5 years. So I was a bit, could I have a sort of query on that? And the other point I need to make, please, is again West Hill, because that surely these comments about is the land developable apply to West Hill. It can't surely be developable within the next 5 years.
Mr. Hollidge.
Sorry, yeah, I could just make one more point. I don't know all the allocations that relate to Speckled Wood. I know about the one at Victoria Avenue, which I think is for 51 units. And I've seen the various constraints in relation to that site. Frankly, I'm amazed it's an allocation in the first place. Secondly, I can't see any way that that's going to be brought forward within the 5-year period.
I'd like to address Adrian as well, because to be honest, these sites, HVO1 and HVO2, I understand that they're subject to an EC ruling regarding contamination of these sites. So why, if that information is known, why are they in this Shaping Hastings document? I also have here, as part of an exhibit, 216357, an Ore Valley Action Letter, which is in 2000, I think. Let's just check the data. I think it's 2007, and it was a letter to the Planning Committee advising that there was contamination on the Speckled Wood site. The research is not being done adequately. It's very well to say that they're looking at all these sites. I think it comes down again to looking at these individual sites and seeing whether they're actually viable to actually do the development on, because there's a lot of information that's being ignored And I think all this information needs to come into the debate. Otherwise, you're saying that these sites can support this development, which I don't think they can.
When you say contamination on the Specklewood site, is that the knotweed?
It is, yes.
Yeah, I see, yeah. Right, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we estimated the cost for the Specklewood, regarding the Japanese knotweed. It comes to something like 100 or 200,000 pounds. In the overall developments, it's not the major cost. I mean, it's the kind of minor cost which you need to, as a part of the clearing of the process and so on, you have to spend, and this is one of those things which is the whole land need to be, we do aware of it and need to be cleaned out. But this is within the overall development project. This is not significant in overall cost involved.
Okay. Mr. Holland.
Yeah, a couple of points. On the Japanese knotweed question, as I said before, it is, I mean, 100, 200,000 pounds is a major abnormal cost on a site, and it must be taken account of in any proper viability study. And just to go back to my client's land at Barley Lane, this is certainly a site that is deliverable in a 5-year period, and so the council should have looked at all sites that were put forward and done a viability study across them all, not just the ones they handpicked.
Okay. I mean, going back to Barley Lane, what sort of net capacity do you think it has in round terms?
Well, previous consents were mounted up to about 30 or 40 flats, but at the moment we're very suggested to the council between 10 and 12 houses is a small number.
Right, yes, Mr. Ingleton.
Can I help Mr. Hollidge about the sites around Specklewood? The first one is CVO1, Victoria Avenue, 51 dwellings. CVO3, the rear of Old London Road, is 10. And CVO4 is 6, Church Street, which add up to a total of 67. So there's 67 around the Specklewood area. And I'd just like to say also that the other 3 sites have got negativity. They add up to quite a large number, it's 225 dwellings. So we've got the Specklewood ones, which we are concerned about, 67, 225 for the whether they're viable and deliverable, and we're going to concern.
Yes, Mr. Albert.
Did you look at the viability with regard to instability and take those costs into account on any site?
Right. Okay. Again, if you could.
I'll save it.
Yes. Save it.
Okay, we can see it.
Yes, Mr. Newell.
Yeah, can I just be brief? On page 12 of our first submission, there is a map which shows Specklewood and the amount of knotweed that's actually on the site.
Yes,
and this was done in 2012, and it is quite a high load of knotweed on it. It's expected to be a considerable amount of money, and the reports that I showed you from 2007 are just for one of the council or 2 of the council sites. And if you look in the reports, it does give figures for costs.
Okay. I mean, when I go onto this site, onto Specklewood, and whoever comes with me on the accompanied site visit, which we will have, do you have to take precautions? I mean, I'm just a bit concerned about taking spores or whatever and getting them in my vegetable garden.
The site has got a full network of public access rights of way through it, and obviously the public are using the site, so I would think the risk is negligible to you. Most of the sites are in large masses on the area. There's a particularly bad site on one side which is we were told, which was probably one of the worst sites of Japanese knotweed the specialists had ever seen, which is quite serious. And obviously there's been a very long line of neglect of this site, and the Trust has got involved to actually try and eliminate some of that. But we're obviously thwarted by the fact that we're attending meetings like this to actually make the potential of the site better. And it is something that we are trying to work towards as well.
And you'll point all this out to me.
I mean,
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I walked on the site a couple of times. Both times I slipped on it. It's not easy to walk through the site or anything like that. I mean, it's a private site. I mean, it's not an easy site at all. I mean, as far as people are walking through it and so on. I mean, I know they got involved about a year or so ago, the Spieglewood group, but I mean, the site is really untidy, and as you said, I mean, it's pretty dangerous to walk in.
Right.
You can see that yourself.
Well, I'll take a risk on that.
Can I just answer that? You will see in our statement there's a letter from a Mr. Khan, who was actually, as a developer, he was actually asked to go and look at the site. His indication was that he was quite surprised how good the ecology was in the site, and he was told that there was lots of metal and there was lots of debris. That strictly is not true.
Well, I should see for myself. Yeah, Mr. Hollidge.
Yeah, it's just picking up on something that Mr. Newbold mentioned and I wasn't aware of, but in relation to Specklewood, in terms of being delivered in a 5-year period, if there's public rights of access across the site which need to be diverted, that's certainly not going to happen within 5 years' time.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Wise.
Well, just one or two little odds and ends. One, if I wish to remove Japanese knotweed, I have to dig out 7 metres of soil or subsoil. Now, if I'm going to build on it, how on earth are you going to put houses? You've got to put more, made up ground before you put the houses on. 2, I think we bring the next point up. Is it tomorrow where wildlife issues come into?
We're looking at nature conservation issues tomorrow, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Right, can I turn now to the council to respond to the points which have been made, please?
I think so. Most of these will go to Mr. Currison initially in respect to specific queries that have been raised. Only I think to also confirm the point made by, apologies if I get the pronunciation wrong, Mr. Balyemi. I think that these costs in the generality of development proposals and the profits that Mr. Keeley has described come from residential allocations are not abnormal and are accountable and able to be accounted for. In respect of the comment that Mr. Hollidge made about deliverability of his client's land, again you will see that on the site visit. Obviously he is indicating deliverability in respect of that land. I just wish to point out that in respect of another site that I understand he has an interest in, that's CVO2 at Frederick Road, that has had a permission since 2010, but obviously for whatever reason that hasn't come forward.
Thank you, sir. I think I've made a note of most of these, but I'm sure you'll help me if I haven't addressed them all. First of all, the specific site where the question of knotweed has been raised. I have seen that report. I think that's probably like to be fully discussed on December the 3rd, I think it is. So I won't go into that in detail, but I have got some queries on the cost conclusions that report makes, and we're taking further advice on that. We'll come back to that specifically. Taking some other points, not strictly in order, I think Mr. Jarvis mentioned has ground stability been taken account of in the individual site assessments as an abnormal cost. When we did the specific site allocation assessments, we asked the council to fill in information based on their SHLA work on a series of abnormal construction elements, and if those problems existed with the site, we made a cost allowance for those in each of the appraisals, which I think you'll have seen in the assessments you have before you. But just for the benefit of the room, the categories of abnormal cost included archaeology and architectural heritage, flood defence, ecology and biodiversity, contamination, Section 106 allowances, ground stability, particular point raised, utilities upgrades, and any site-specific others, where the primary school fell into that one, I think, with £150,000 community hall. So, if you like, the site-specific abnormals we believe have been properly looked at, and indeed the contamination remediation were costs that were made allowances for on the All Valley sites, which was raised, I think, over here. Some points Mr. Hollidge made, not really for me to say, but the point about should every site put forward as part of a local plan process be assessed for viability. No, I don't believe it should. I think it only comes to determine whether sites are viable and deliverable when they've already been through a process of other factors to see if they are likely to be put forward, and I think Council have acted responsibly in that. Mr. Hollidge also made the point that abnormal costs are not always deducted from land price or site price and therefore land value. I would have to dispute that. Wearing a different hat, if you like, to the NCS, I run a residential property development business in the Midlands, and I've never seen either an option agreement with a residential developer or any commercial development site where abnormal costs are not deducted from a site purchase price, as planning obligation costs are, and a range of other factors that will affect the site price. So I'm rather surprised by that. And finally, in relation to Mr. Pickup, yes, the council-specific DM3 policies were taken account of in all the residential viability assessment tests. In specifics, do you want those particular figures, house type sizes that were in the assessments?
I mean, I can see that in the
Okay, I think you have them before you, sir, but I can reiterate them if necessary. Would you like me to?
So, had you finished? Or?
Yeah, it was just whether you want me to go through the actual technical detail of all the densities and site and house type sizes that have been factored in to answer Mr. Pickup.
Yes, if you can do it. I mean, I think the main point is that you've said that policy DM3 and its requirements have been factored in, and I think that's probably as far as we need to take it at present. Right, yes. Mr. Newbold.
Yes, firstly, about the cost of development. We understand that a lot of the housing in these particular sites are supposed to be low-cost housing, and they're presumably going to be provided by housing association development. I understand that their development has been capped so that they don't have these extraordinary amounts of money available to actually build on low-cost sites when they're not viable. If this is the case, some of these sites are all out. I would also point out that the Victoria Avenue site on here, on page 204, doesn't actually have this DM3 policy attributed to it.
Well, I mean, in fact, all these allocation policies, at the end it says all local plan policies will be considered during the decision-making process as appropriate. That's at the bottom of all these policies. I mean, I'm looking at HOV2 at present by way of example. And in fact, you'll recall yesterday that we were looking at the prospect of including a paragraph, presumably at the beginning of the plan, which would say that planning applications would be determined in accordance with the development plan, which is the planning strategy plus the development management plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So I mean, we've always got the context of the development plan against which all planning applications would be considered.
If I just could say, the problem was with that the Speckwood site and Robsack A site weren't in this sustainability document, and we pointed that out to you yesterday. I think the council brought in a 2012 document which you ruled out.
Sorry, I ruled it out?
Well, I think you did, yes. I think you said that it was it was not something that was discussed on the time anyway.
I don't remember ruling anything out.
May I clarify?
Yes.
May I clarify?
Yeah.
I think the council's witness who was speaking to that was Mrs. Cameron, and she confirmed and she showed you the main parent sustainability appraisal.
That's right. That was the URS.
That's correct, and she took you through a few of the what is referred to as the sort of traffic lighted appendices to show how we'd assessed, and then she referred to the update document that Mr. Newbold has just referred to, and confirmed, sir, that it was only in respect of the changes between the first and the second version, i.e. the revised and the proposed revised, that we had updated.
Yeah, and both documents are in the library, so I certainly haven't ruled that out.
Thank you for confirming that and letting us know that. The point of the whole debate of this sustainability appraisal document, as you rightly said, it is to include changes to the site or to the plan. Speckled wood, and I am aware of that, is a change to this plan, and it should have been recorded in here. There is only one line for speckled wood in the 2004 plan as Ore Valley, and I think as that is the case, this should have been in part of this document as well, and it is severely lacking.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Hollidge.
Yes, if I can come back on a number of points. Firstly, just to address a quick point that Mr. Phillips made in relation to another allocated site at Frederick Road, which we talked about briefly yesterday. It has an existing planning permission. It's not uncommon, given the severe economic depression that this country has been through, which I believe is the worst in 100 years, that not all sites with permissions would have been developed in that period. That's quite a sensible approach. It will be coming forward for development, and work will be starting on site soon. If I could just address the point on viability. I mean, I'm actually from the Midlands myself, but I'm not aware of these practices that the gentleman's talking about, where all abnormal costs are deducted from land value. In 30 years as a valuer, I've never heard anything like that before. It's a matter of negotiation between the landowner and the developer as to price, whether the landowner is prepared to deduct an amount in relation to abnormal costs. That's purely a matter for negotiations. It's not a standard practice. I've never come across that before. In 30 years of doing residential residual appraisals and viability studies. Also, just going back to some of the other points that he made, I mean, it does seem questionable whether this evidence should actually be considered in the fact that it's not been applied to all sites that were put forward, and has only been applied to the sites that the council has selected, which means that the sites that have been selected appears to be not on the basis of viability and whether they are deliverable and developable as required by NPPF, but on the discretion of a council officer as to whether it's a suitable site. If we can have a viability study on allocated sites, then we must have a viability study on all other sites. Otherwise, how can you have an informed opinion on this matter of land supply? It seems nonsense to me, and I think the evidence should be struck out. Also on the basis that he seems to be implying that the study's not even been finished yet. And then just lastly, picking up on a point that I think Mr. Newbold raised in relation to grant funding for housing associations. I've done a lot of work with housing associations in the past and still do. It's true that under the current government that the substantial grant funding that was allocated to housing associations to develop sites for affordable housing has been withdrawn, and therefore the viability of those sites and in fact the whole council's policy on affordable housing needs to be re-examined, because if they're looking at affordable housing, it's not going to be delivered on sites because they don't have a grant subsidy to take account of some of these abnormal costs, and also where sites are non-profitable. So I think that whole aspect of affordable housing, I know we're going to talk about later, but the council's current policy is undeliverable.
Right. Are there any... Yes, Mrs. Brown.
Thank you very much. Both my queries were not answered. The first one was in respect of Western Leonard school site, where I understand that the point was made that it wouldn't be able to be developed within 5 years, and I said that I thought it was now out to consultation on a planning application, and there were nods from all behind the gentleman who said that. The second one was about West Hill again, when I raised the point that surely West Hill couldn't be developed within 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, we will be looking at this particular school site and West Hill later on during the examination when we're looking at the focus areas and the various sites in them.
But with respect to that statement was made that it couldn't be done, and I'm saying it's out to consultation.
Okay, well,
now,
I'll ask the council to respond to that. Yes.
Sorry, just one more point that I forgot to mention. The gentleman was saying that in the viability studies he's done on the sites that the council has picked, i.e. allocated, that he's asked the council for their views on abnormal costs, and he gave us a whole list of those. I'm not sure if the council are actually best positioned to advise on abnormal costs. I don't know where that information would have come from, whether they've done cost studies in relation to the various elements, but just to take the council's word in relation to that, I think is a very flippant approach.
Yes, Mr. Newbold.
Yes, just as in respect to this CVO1, CVO2, I wanted clarification on the point. My understanding there's an EC directive which prevents development of this site due to the contamination. If that's the case, how does this matter get resolved with the development management plan, and does that supersede the actual judgment which is given by the EC, or does this actually make a nonsense of the whole process because there's an EC decision on this?
Council, do you wish to respond to those points?
I think if there's an EC decision or anything that Mr. Newbold wishes to bring to our attention, if he could provide some detail, then happy to comment. But otherwise, I'm not really certain the detail of what you're talking. May I make just a couple of comments, sir, in respect of Mr. Holledge's suggestion that all sites should have been viability tested. Mr. Kerrison has already confirmed, sir, that he believes that the council has taken a perfectly reasonable approach in going out to specialists for viability testing in respect of those sites that it believes should go forward for inclusion in the development management plan. Just to confirm, sir, that that is the only reasonable and pragmatic way of moving forward. There are a huge number of landowners who, not unsurprisingly, want their land to be allocated for residential development. It would be a huge and wasteful task to undertake that sort of exercise for all of them if they were not ultimately meeting other requirements of the framework in terms of moving forward for allocation. He then referred to the fact that these were just discarded at the discretion of council officers, and I just wish to remind you, sir, that obviously the plan before you, you heard yesterday, went to the full council for decision to submit, and I think Mr. Chowney, or Councillor Chowney, sorry, indicated to you, sir, that that matter was not called, and he considered that both in terms of the adoption of the strategy and the submission, that was a unanimous decision of the council. So Mr. Holledge then talked about the NCS evidence being somehow struck out, and obviously the work that was undertaken for the council by NCS has been submitted and is there in the library and part of the submission documents. I think therefore his comment that information from the council as to the abnormal costs was somehow flippant or were we in the best position. Mr. Holledge will be aware from correspondence that I've already alluded to in respect of his site, but in respect of many others, that Borough Council holds an inordinate amount of information on sites. We have undertaken flood risk assessments. We are aware from planning histories and planning appeals on issues that are appropriate to bring to the attention of those specialists. He also referred to, and the question was posed in specific terms about land instability, and we have already alluded to the fact, although we may again have to disagree or agree to disagree with Mr Hollidge as to whose fault it was, but there is a history of land instability in the area that his client's site is in, and he has been advised of that in writing before.
Thank you. Right. Fresh points. Anything new?
Can I just come back?
Yes, Mr. Newell.
Yes, on the point of which was made here, that there is the work hasn't been done on some of these sites because they can't do it on all sites. All of these sites are in this development plan, so therefore they should have been done. Secondly, on the point he made about the fact that there were no objections at the Cabinet hearing or at the full council hearing, we were categorically stopped from appearing at this hearing. We were told we needed 1,500 signatures to actually speak at this meeting, and in fact this matter of speckled wood has already been before the Cabinet, where we made a suggestion that there could be a possible land swap which would afford the developers to actually have the potential to develop on a better site that would allow them to actually proceed with development. That is already lodged with the council, and basically there is associated documents for the managing structure that was lodged at the same time in November 5. That was held at a Cabinet meeting, which I believe you have a video of.
I'll have to check that. Yes, Mr. Hollidge.
Really, I just need to come back on some comments that Mr. Phillips has made there. Again, I know we're going to be talking about this in detail, so I'll be brief. In relation to the land instability that he keeps referring to on my client's land, there's only been one incident of land strip, and as I said to earlier, that was solely down to the council's failure to meet their legal obligations in maintaining a retaining wall when they sold the land. In relation to his comments about not carrying out viability studies on sites which were non-allocated, I mean, how can we have a balanced view at this hearing if we've only done viability studies on sites that they want to bring forward? And it's hardly surprising when it comes to Cabinet that they're going to support those allocations. So to suggest that there's been a balanced assessment is quite frankly ludicrous. If they're going to do a viability study, then they clearly could have done one on my client's land. The suggestions or the suggested constraints against development we have challenged on many times, and the council have not adequately responded. We've challenged the designation, we've challenged the instability. These are officer preferences in bringing forward sites. They've not been subject to independent scrutiny. They're clearly sites that the council want to bring forward, and they're not considering other sites which, in relation to my client's site, if I just compare it to the site of Victoria Avenue, my client's site is clearly deliverable in the 5-year period, whereas the site of Victoria Avenue isn't. And so we have to have a balanced view on this. And how can we have a balanced view when the council have only decided to investigate and do viability studies on sites that they want to bring forward, not the general public or the landowners or other interested parties? They're just purely being disregarded. It's a council preference and has been backed by Cabinet, and that's hardly surprising.
Right, yes, Mr. Newell.
Just on a further point that I was saying about the council meetings, so I think this is important that people are aware that there has been problems with getting this in. I'm also aware that councillors have not been allowed to actually comment on this process, and the reason what we've been told this is because of a legal obligation that they've been told they cannot comment on a plan that's been judged by the Cabinet and the council. This means that they have lost their ability to be able to vocalise the public's opinions about this site, and I think that's very poor.
Well, Mr. Newburn, I mean, my job is to examine a local plan which has been produced by a democratically elected council. I mean, that's really my starting point. Now, how it's, the various machinations as to how it's got here, I really want to put as far aside as I can do. I want to concentrate my attention on what is before me. Now, the examination process enables members of the public to make their comments, make representations, and they are all considered. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing.
But I would still say that if they've been legally restricted from making a comment during this examination, that is a potential part of our public that cannot make comments on this process.
I'm happy briefly to comment, sir. Essentially, my understanding of the regulations is that any individual, whether they're a councillor, a king, a queen or whoever, if they have not made a representation on the plan, duly made, and advised the programme officer that they wish to appear at the hearing, then it is perfectly proper if you decide, sir, that they should not speak. I think the council, both at the pre-hearing meeting and indeed now in response to Mrs. Pamela Brown's suggestion, have shown some latitude and leniency way above what we needed to in terms of representations and how they're submitted to us. That is my understanding of the regulations, and Mr. Newbold's allegations as to why people aren't here, as far as I'm aware, are totally unfounded, yet again, as is much of what he seems to be saying.
So you can confirm that there is no legal reason why they cannot or could not submit a response to this examination?
At the risk of repeating myself, the regulations state if a representation to the plan is not made, this is going back to the 2013 and 14 full period for consultations and representations on the plan, any individual, if they haven't made a representation and indeed advised through the programme officer that they wish to appear, then there is no right for them to appear.
I don't think that's the point I'm trying to ask you.
I don't want to get into a legal argument about the interpretation of the development plan regulations. All those people who have made representations at the due time do have a right to appear, and many people have taken advantage or benefited from that regulation. They are here now, and I'm listening to what they say. So, are there any fresh points before we adjourn for lunch? Yes, Mr. Hollidge.
Just a very quick point in support of what Mr. Newbold was saying. Given, and I'm not talking about my clients around here, I'm talking about the two sites which seem to be the subject of quite a lot of public opposition in terms of RobSac and Speckled Wood. I do find it rather unusual that the only councillor we've seen at this public examination has been Councillor Chowney, who's obviously presenting the report. I would have thought that the ward councillors for those two particular sites would have been present and would have made their comments, and I think you can draw from that what you will.
Well, I mean, I can't force people to come to this examination, but all those people who are entitled to and have come, I hope have been made welcome, and I respect their views and I will take them into account.
Excuse me, I understand that you can make requests for people to actually attend, and in fact there has been some discussion with Mr. Stevens to get her local councillor in,
yes,
which he's declined. So forgive me if I'm wrong, but I understand you do have the latitude to do that.
If I think somebody can help me, I can invite them to come. Yes, that's true. And in fact, I invited Councillor Phil Scott, I think it was, but I invited him to come, I think, to the discussion on RobSac A, but he's unable to attend. That's my information.
So there are a couple of points I can respond to.
First, I think in answer to Mrs. Brown's point, I'm not sure that was answered, the site I referred to was in the 0 to 5 year supply, so that would be in the immediately available, not in 5 years' time. I think there was a misunderstanding by Mr. Hollidge of what I said. The council provided the criteria for assessment of cost impacts on all these sites, but the costs attributed to them were based on advice taken from GLEED, so I'm sure you'll be well aware of international quantity surveyors and construction cost consultants. The council didn't provide the costs, they simply said there was that particular issue with the site, and then the cost attributed to it was based on independent advice.
Right, okay.
Just quickly coming back on that point, just raise a query. Are you saying that Leeds then visited each of these sites and did an assessment?
No, I'm not saying that. It was based
They didn't visit the sites? Well, how can they make a proper assessment?
Because it's based on an area-based assumption for that type of issue, that type of abnormal cost, based on the site area.
Frankly, as a valuer, I find that extraordinary that you're taking cost advice from somebody who hasn't visited the site.
Yes, Mr. Newbold.
On that same point, I find that amazing. I cannot understand how you can judge the cost of something without either being on the site. In addition to that, surely then the cost is only an informed cost on the information that's been sent to the individual, and that will have a benefit on what the GLE will actually give according to the cost. So again, it's directed by what the officer puts forward instead of the actual site visit.
Well,
if I could just add to that point, maybe. A lot of these abnormals, which he's given us a great list of, you can't simply take a percentage figure or an estimated figure in terms of flood work, ecology, contamination, stability, utilities, archaeology. A lot more detailed studies would need to be done, and I suggest you'd have to have a professional report on each one of these aspects before you can even come close to estimating any of these costs of abnormals. Just to take a finger in the air seems most bizarre, but maybe it suits a purpose. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Wise.
What I can't understand is Mr. Phillips says all these people are, and you sir also say that lots of people, but look how few there are here. The thing is, every time I go round the town, and I hope you will also be able to, inquire, do you know anything about the new borough plan? And it just goes very quiet, and everybody says no.
Well, we looked at
and
consultation.
Thousands of them.
We looked at consultation yesterday, Mr.
Yeah,
Wise.
but the point is, Mr. Phillips has brought it up again a little while ago, and the truth is, people in Hastings do not know.
Well, as I say, we looked at consultations yesterday. Yes. Are there any further any matters that you want to take up?
I don't think so, sir, no.
Right. Okay.
Can I just ask
that
we go on to the next point before lunch, because my clients are going to have difficulty getting back this afternoon, and I think if we went on to say 1 o'clock, we would get through.
Okay, yes, we'll continue. Yes. So if we can come on to 2.3. Well, normally I ask the council to that first. Would it be helpful if you were to start us on
I think so, if you wouldn't mind, that would be
yes,
great.
certainly.
Thank you. We've heard quite a lot of discussion around the table this morning about the various constraints that we all know about in Hastings, from the sea to the south and from the high world area of outstanding natural beauty to the north, which constrain the town. The town has a lot of other constraints in terms of stability we've heard about, topography, and there isn't actually a lot of greenfield sites available in Hastings, so we're really talking about trying to find suitable homes on brownfield sites and the abnormal development costs that can be associated with brownfield sites. Quite frankly, Hastings is not an easy area to build new houses, and the constraints on the land do affect the viability of sites coming forward. And the developers I represent do an awful lot of new house building in Hastings and the surrounding area very successfully, and are very concerned about the type of constraints that are being introduced for the first time in Hastings, and indeed anywhere else in East Sussex that I'm aware of, through policy DM3, and in particular the guidelines for minimum internal floor space standards. We've submitted quite a lengthy statement, which I won't go through, but just to summarise that, the concerns that my client has is that if you were to have, what it says here is guidelines for minimum internal floor standards, but I think our fear is they will become minimum standards and not guidelines, because we've already had that experience on a site in Hastings up to one of the allocated sites, the planning officer concerned is starting to go down the road of minimum standards rather than guidelines for minimum standards, but appreciated in that case this was only a draft policy, therefore full weight couldn't be attached to the policy at this stage. Now the consequence of imposing these guidelines would affect two things. Firstly, it would be the build costs, and we've put in the statement the build cost figures, typical build cost figures in Hastings. Of course they're variable on a site-by-site basis, going on exceptional costs and what have you. So there's a build costs issue, and the other then factor to be taken into account is the number of units that could then be achieved on the site, which is why I asked the question as to whether the viability assessment had actually taken account of the full consequence of introducing Part F of Policy DM3. We've provided a number of case studies, recent case studies on sites that are currently being developed, showing the consequence of developing those sites had this new minimum standard come into play, and that would have done two things. It would have reduced the number of units on each of those sites, and I can give you some examples. We gave you the Fellows Road case study, which has been built very successfully for 12 units. That would have become 9 units. The Seacrest View site at 191 The Ridge, we would certainly ask you to visit one of the homes there, which is currently under construction, and there's a finished unit which you can have a look at. That would have moved down from 9 units to 7 units. And the very large site, a difficult site within All Valley, a regeneration area, we've called it High Breezes, east of Pennine Rise. That's got consent for 79 units. Now, had these standards been imposed, that would have reduced to 62 units. The number of 2-bedroom units on that site was 57 been approved, that would have dropped to 43. 22 3-bedroom units have been approved, that would have dropped to 19. So the total consequence of all of those sites, well, I say all of those sites, just 3 sites, total number of units 101, that would have dropped to 78. But the point is made in the supporting statement that in fact this developer, who's the local developer, knows the area extremely well, wouldn't have developed any of these sites had this standard been imposed, so there would have been a loss of 101 units, which would not have come forward. Now, I've got my client behind me, I'm sure he's burning to say something, so I would just like to hand over to Mr. Beswick, who is the Managing Director of the Park Lane Group.
Right, yes. You have asked me to look at Fellows Road, and yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I've been a developer in Hastings for 27 years, and prior to that, worked in an architect's office, primarily working with developers in Hastings for 6 years prior to that. So totaling 33 years experience of developing in Hastings. We have built, currently building, and due to build in our build programme prior to 2017, 391 new homes in the borough. So I think it probably could be accepted that we are substantial contributors to the housing supply in the borough. In the housing document prepared by Hastings Borough Council October 2014, Appendix 1, I think is deliverable housing units. If you take the deliverable housing units from 2014-2015, of the 128 houses being shown as deliverable, 19 of these are ours, currently developed or being developed, which represents 15%. Of the 880 dwellings shown as deliverable between 2015 and 2020, 146 of these are on sites that are allocated and owned by us and currently in our build programme to be developed prior to 2017, which represents 16.66%. So we are somewhere around 15 to 16% currently of the number of houses being shown as deliverable by 2020. As a company, we do favour areas of regeneration in Hastings, such as All Valley, and provide what we consider as being quality new homes at affordable prices. But as I'm sure you can understand, there is a glass ceiling on values compared to perhaps more affluent areas. and boroughs. There are very few private developments in Hastings with smaller first-time buyer type housings being developed, and there is clearly a need for these. There's obviously an appetite for such housing, as can be demonstrated that in the last 19 months we have developed and sold to the open market 44 of these house types. Developing smaller house types doesn't mean low standards. Mike, I'm assuming that this document is held by everybody here. Okay, well, turning to Mr. Pickup's representation and turning to Appendix 2, pages 20 to 29, is just a typical example of one of our developments, which is the Fellas Road development Mr. Pickup briefly spoke about. And in this appendix, there are photographs, pages 24, 25, 26, 27. Now, the reason I'm pointing these out specifically is if you then turn to Appendix 2, which follows it, and look at the photographs, this is actually a development opposite us, which is a housing association, I believe it's Appendix 3.
Appendix, right, yes.
Appendix 3. 32 onwards, page 32 onwards, and Appendix 3 are photographs of the developed site opposite, which are larger house types. And I think you'd agree that compare our photographs of our site with the site opposite, whilst it can be accepted that our house types are smaller, I think it actually shows perhaps a better laid out site. Smaller units does free up more space, does give you more flexibility with creating a better design. So I don't think it's necessarily accepted that a smaller house type provides a lesser standard of development. Now, Mr. Pickup mentioned a moment ago the opportunity to come and visit one of our finished units up the ridge, and we really would urge anybody in the room here. No, it's actually.
Well, wait a minute. Yes.
Up on the ridge, we'd welcome, obviously by appointment because it's not open, the opportunity for anybody to come and visit to see exactly what we're talking about with the house size standards that we develop. A typical house of our 2 and 3 bedroom house types, as detailed in Mr. Pickup's representation, consists of an entrance porch, a living room, a kitchen, a downstairs cloakroom, 2 bedrooms for a 2-bedroom layout, 3 bedroom for a 3-bedroom layout. In our 2-bedroom layout, they are double bedrooms, so it is a 4-person house. In our 3-bedroom house, there are 2 doubles and a single, and a family bathroom. Hastings Borough Council's recent changes to their policy imposing social housing requirements from 1 and above units has already made it much harder to make sites viable in Hastings. If you were to impose these minimum standards, I truly believe that it's going to put an awful lot of pressure on developers and the viability of schemes, and at the risk of sounding like a profiteer, fundamentally, in order to deliver houses, developers need to make a profit. We have prepared, which I'm going to pass you back in a moment to Lawrence Holtz, our construction director, we have prepared comparisons of the viability of schemes that we have developed or currently developing to demonstrate the impact of, or the cost implications on those sites for the minimum standards, and that's not taking into consideration the already approved policy change of the social housing requirements. Interestingly, adjoining local authorities, Borough and Wilton, which are both more affluent not seen fit to impose minimum housing sizes. If you were minded to consider imposing minimum houses, minimum size standards, would it not be possible to consider the possibility of doing this on a ward by ward basis? An example of a site that would almost definitely be undeliverable if minimum size requirements were imposed would be our current site, High Breezes, which is at the Cheviots, where the site was on the open market for, I believe, a couple of years. It went to public auction twice, private treaty, and eventually to a tender sale, which we purchased the site. But it was clear that the site was difficult and constrained to make a development out of, and we put a very strong case forward to Hastings Borough Council and ultimately obtained planning permission for a redesign which ultimately has provided Hastings, as we're currently developing the site, with 80 new private first-time buyer type and second-time buyer type 2 and 3 bedroom houses, which, if these minimum size standards had been imposed, the site would not have been deliverable. We also introduced, with this particular site, and in fact it's fair to say also the site at Fellows Road, the Ridge, and this High Breezes, which is the Cheviots, we redesigned the site to eliminate any flats on the site to ensure that we were providing new housing rather than flats, as there has been in the past an overdevelopment of flats in Hastings, and we are very careful to ensure that we actually provide what we consider to be good quality housing at an affordable price. With regard to the cost implications on land values and general viability, I'd actually like to pass you the moment over to Lawrence Hubbs, our construction director.
Right. Yes, sir.
Good morning. I'm Lawrence Hulks, construction management consultant for the Park Lane Group. You've got Mike's submission, Mr. Pickup's submission. Just like to run through the cost aspects of it, and sorry if it's a bit boring, but as it's been pointed out by a number of people, Hastings sites have their own particular construction constraints. It could be ground conditions, contamination relating to brownfield sites, and ultimately, once sites are developed, such constraints have been resolved by engineering solutions, and those are buried, so nobody actually sees what the money is spent on. But as far as costs are concerned, they are a significant element of the viability of the site, and such costs are spread across the number of dwellings that are on a site. There are a number of aspects that are required regardless of I wouldn't say totally regardless of the number of units, but if there is a change in the number of units of maybe 20-25%, the communal costs remain pretty much the same. And that would feed through to the actual construction costs on a per metre square basis. The proposed standards would have an effect in reducing the number of units that could be delivered on the site, and we've already mentioned our development at Nightingale Place, which was developed as 12 units but would have been 9, and up at the Ridge, Seacrest View, there's 9 units on that site, and that would have been 7. On the specifics of our High Breezes development, the original planning consent was for 79 units. We've now got an additional unit, but the layout, had the standards been applied, would have resulted in only 62 units being delivered. And to demonstrate how the cost of the estate costs that are generally unaffected by the number of units, we have produced two viabilities. The first viability, which is contained at pages 57 to 69 of our submission, is in fact the viability that was submitted as part of the planning process on the original application. Now, this viability makes allowance for not only the base cost of the houses but for the abnormal costs of the estate, roads, sewers, etc. This site has particular engineering issues regarding surface water. There is a significant amount of attenuation required on site, and as a result of the topography of the site, there's extensive retaining walls, structures, etc. If you go to page 69, the bottom line on the site was that there was a site value based on the 79 unit original application with a site value of £17,527. So it's a marginal site in terms of viability. We have produced a similar appraisal based on the 62 unit scheme layout, and that's contained at pages 70 to 82. The layout stays pretty much or almost identically the same, so the estate costs remain the same. The number of units reduces, the mix changes slightly, but at the end of the day, the site value, which is shown at page 82, has turned into a negative site value over £1.2 million. On that basis, the development would not have been viable. So, as has previously been said, we wouldn't have been talking about a reduction in possibly 17 or 18 units, but a total of 79/80 units would have been lost. And these are the numbers that are actually contained within the council's own figures. So it does throw into question whether those numbers contained in the council's submission can actually be delivered. The other aspect to this is that if the costs per dwelling go up, then can these be recovered through the sales values? And we have made an assessment of what this would have been based on our Nightingale Place development and the Seacrest View developments, because we know what the costs were on those two sites, and the increase in the sales values per plot would have needed to be £22,000 on Nightingale Place and £30,000 per plot on Seacrest View. That's over and above what the market is dictating at this stage. And if those sales values can't be achieved, you've developed a site that can't be sold, and ultimately there's no point in developing that site. The difference in the effect per plot between Nightingale Place and Seacrest View, between what 12 units on Nightingale Place would have achieved and 9 units would have achieved, demonstrates that the imposition of the standards would have had, comparing Nightingale Place and Seacrest View, the uplift in the sales values does demonstrate that the imposition of the standards would not have a consistent effect across the borough, but each site would be affected to varying degrees. Again, that goes back to what Mr. Beswick said, that perhaps if the council if you're reminded to impose such standards, then it perhaps could be dealt with on a ward-by-ward basis, so that some factoring in of the economic viability of the sites could be achieved. Excuse me. Just to go back to the previous point on the figures that we have used in terms of reduction of units and the viabilities of the sites, it does cast into doubt the actual figures that the council have included within their report and proposals as being able to be developed during the plan period.
Thank you.
Can I just make a couple of very quick concluding comments? You might say, so what do I want to do about it? You've heard one suggestion, which is to, if you're going to introduce a guideline for minimum internal space standards, you do it on a borough basis, which reflects the ability of people to buy houses within those, ward basis, not borough based, borough, of course. The other thing, of course, would be to not have the policy, or that part of the policy at all, to strip it out as not being necessarily imposing an unreasonable constraint on house builders such as the Park Lane Group. Or thirdly, you lower the standard to increase the flexibility, and typically the size of unit that the Park Lane Group, when they're building small, open market, low-cost units, that's the specialism. A 2-bed, 3-person unit would be 56 square metres or thereabouts, and a 3-bed, 4-person unit would be 65 square metres. So if the standard were to start at those sorts of levels, my clients would have far less concern about it. I think for the larger house groups, that's a different matter, because that's probably aiming at a different client group than low-cost, open market, first-time buyers and those wishing to downsize from larger properties. Sorry we've taken so long, but we wanted to just get through those points.
Yes, I'm not quite with you on where you're saying a possible revision of the or the internal floor space. Can we just turn to F of DM3,
yes,
please? And if you could take me through that. It says that dwellings are designed to allow residents to live comfortably and conveniently with sufficient internal space. The guidelines for minimum internal floor areas are 1 to 2 person dwellings. It's 51 there. What are you saying it could be?
We've not come up with a figure for 1-bedroom units, because that's really aimed at flats, and my clients don't really develop flats anymore. They're more specialising into producing houses, which is what they see as being the assessed demand within Hastings Borough. If you go on to the next figure...
right, so 51, you would be happy for it to stay?
We wouldn't have any views about that.
Right, well, what about the 66?
Yeah, that's the principal concern.
Right.
2-bed, 3-bed person would be 66 in the minimum. Well, guidelines for minimum standards, we would like that to be 56. 56 plays 66. And
no,
for...
wait a minute, no, is that? We've got 66 there at present.
Yes, and we'd like that to be 56.
Right, okay.
And for a...
and 77, what does that become?
Well, we haven't got a figure for that, because we're looking at 3-bedroom... just bear with me a second.
Oh, just a minute.
The product they produce isn't a 2-bedroom, 4-person, so again we haven't got a view on that. But the next one that's missing, which we do have a view on, is a 3-bedroom, 4-person,
right,
or 3-bedroom, 5-person.
Right, 3-bedroom,
4-person, which would be 65 square metres.
You'd say 65 for that. What about the 3-bedroom, 5-person, which we've got 93?
Again, they don't have a product that relates to that figure.
So 93 would stay the same, and 4-bedroom...
Same again with the 4-bedroom.
Right, so 106 would stay the same. Right, okay, thank you. Yes, I'm going to turn to the council now. So can we sort of go back to the usual approach? Mr. Phillips, if you would like to amplify your response to 2.3 in the light of representations received, and particularly as regards DM3, please.
Certainly, sir. If I may make some general comments, and then we'll be handing to Mr. Kerrison to talk specifically on the viability.
Right.
You prefaced the wording in the policy at criterion F, dwellings are designed to allow residents to live comfortably, and just refer to the framework, the National Planning Policy Framework, at paragraph 56, where it confirms the government attaches great importance to the design of the built environment. Good design is a key aspect of sustainable development, indivisible from good planning and contributing positively to making places better for people. So that's broadly where we had come from. I would wish to say at the outset, sir, and as our development management colleagues cannot be here, they have confirmed to me that they have been happy to work with the Park Lane Group and have been pleased with a number of the successful schemes that have been delivered. There was reference made by, I think, Mr. Pickup to say that Wealdon and Rother haven't gone down this particular route. We have heard this morning, so Hastings is very, very different, and we had concerns expressed by a number of people on the other side about very, very high density. And we had references this morning to we simply can't cram any more houses in, or this volume of housing. Now, I would just wish to say, sir, that some of the examples that I've seen in the appendix that was submitted by Mr. Pickup on behalf of his client, from a professional perspective, I think they show good schemes, they show good design, and you've been invited to visit one of those sites. I think the fact that some of those are actually being approved, again, sir, reinforces that what is proposed here are guidelines, and they are guidelines to encourage residents to live comfortably and conveniently. Those guidelines also refer at criterion G to the appropriate levels of private external space. And that is the broad thrust of where this policy is aimed. There is an irony, I think, sir, that the government has very recently concluded a consultation on this very, very subject, and that concluded about 2 weeks ago. And I understand that such space standards have been in evidence in London for a period of time. I do think in the round, sir, and before I pass on to Mr. Kerrison, that again, Mr. Pickup's suggestion on behalf of his client, which I think is a helpful suggestion, to either look at it on a ward-by-ward basis or to look at some different figures. It could also be the case, sir, that we have referred clearly to these as guidelines. It may be, sir, that you would consider that some additional wording to the policy to say that any significant departure, and that could be 5%, 10% latitude, from those guidelines would be expected to be justified on a case-by-case basis. That might be an easier way of doing it than to look at ward by ward. But I do come back to the comments made, I think, by Teresa Jarvis in respect to one particular ward that she described as one of the most densely populated in the county. So that's broadly, I think, how we've come from. If I can ask perhaps Mr. Kerrison to comment on the viability, and maybe then Mr. Harman to talk to some of the evidence studies that have gone behind the production of these standards.
Yeah, just one comment I've got on this. I mean, you say they are guidelines, but I mean, policy DN3, it is a policy which is of higher status than guidelines, and I just wondered if some sort of wording could be introduced. I mean, perhaps whether it could be, I mean, I'm thinking aloud on this, I'm just wondering whether it could be relegated from a policy to be a guideline, and something along the lines that the council will look at in its determination of planning applications. The council will be guided by the following criteria. I know that's a bit clumsily worded, but that's the sort of thing that I'm looking at present.
I think that is the sort of flexibility that obviously Park Lane are looking at. I just refer, we had a not dissimilar debate yesterday, sir, about how many criteria should stay or depart. Mr. Hollidge wanted almost like a presumption in favour of sustainable development and no further references. I think there was concern from a number of persons, including the council, that there needed to be something a bit clearer than that in the policy. I only indicate, sir, that a wording to the effect that, where there is variation from these, or significant variation, justification would be expected to be provided by the developer. and then
Right.
that could still stay with the firmness of a policy, but giving the flexibility.
Oh, I see. Yes, a policy, but a flexible policy rather than guidelines.
Because as soon as anything is relegated, if I can call it that way, to text, as you say, sir, it may be again that there would be concerns, some of which were expressed by residents yesterday, that they feel that when certain developments happen, and I'm not saying this at all in respect of the Park Lane developments, but they feel let down by the finished product.
What I'd like to do, I mean, obviously I'll take comments on this, but I think perhaps the way forward is if I could draft something for general consideration. But yeah, I'd certainly like to tackle this, and as I say, I'll take into account what everybody says and go on from there if you're happy with that.
And so,
can we just come in?
Well, I'd just like to hear from the council.
Well,
first.
we'd like to sort of come into that point, because otherwise we're going to get broadened into another point, which is on whether the actual sites are deliverable. Can we not just deal with this in isolation first, please?
Well, I'd like to hear from the council first.
Thank you, sir. First of all, just on the entire premise of the Park Lane Group's argument, which is that, and we've heard a lot of evidence on cost, which in the round is saying if you have a larger house, it costs more to build. That's not in dispute. But at the same time, they seem to be saying that if you have a larger house, you don't obtain any more value for it, and that's what I think I have a problem with, and I'd like to go through some specifics on the viability appraisal. Just to also clarify what we're talking about specifically, I think this is clear now, but I think the focus is on Park Lane Group's proposal for a 56 square metre 2-bedroom house and a 65 square metre 3-bedroom house versus the council's 66 2-bed and 93 5-bed. That's basically what I've looked at, because I think that's what the submission focuses on. Just looking at some of the case studies, the first one I think is the Fellows Road case study, and I think there's a table on page 33 of the Park Lane Group evidence. That shows that if the... I'll let you get to that, sir.
Yes, 33, right. Yes, I've got page 33 here.
Yeah, I think that's a table, if I've got the right page, that shows a variance of 23 square metres between the Park Lane Group scheme and the same scheme if the council's...
So, well, page 33, I've got a photograph.
Right, I may have, that's just 33 on my electronic copy. Let's see if I can find it. Appendix 3, so Fellows Road, Hastings, it's a table that follows the Appendix 3 sheet.
Yes, I've got it. Page 30.
That's not
30, okay.
That's the scheme on the opposite side of the road.
Right, but am I looking at the table? It says Fellows Road, Hastings at the top, application NRHS FA 1100A25. Is that what I'm looking at?
You're looking at the right table, but that's not the Park Lane Group site. That's the comparable site that we used on the opposite side of the road.
Right.
Which has been developed to more or less the standards that the council would like to, the guidelines the council would like to bring into effect. And we related to that site to show the physical differences between what can be achieved with smaller units on our site compared to what has been achieved by a housing association on a site on the opposite side of the road. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I just want to make that clear.
No, that's actually quite helpful. Thanks. It was more of a question on that site because I wasn't quite sure what it was intended to demonstrate. But I'll move on to your, let's say, perhaps more relevant, larger case study, the High Breezes site. And again, I better just get the right page for this. So the plan that you have the Park Lane have prepared, and I think this is page 50. to illustrate the impact, if you like, of the council standards on a reduction in unit numbers.
Yes, I've got the layout.
Okay.
Page 50.
Well, I think that's been prepared to illustrate that the original 79 unit consent would go down to 62 units if the standards were applied. The difficulty I have with that, if you look at that plan and compare it to the approved plan, which you probably don't have before you, but we...
Yes, it's on so again, it's on page 46.
Okay. I'm just not certain that the plan that's been prepared accurately reflects how that site could be developed with the council standards. Particularly the 3-bedroom houses have, if you like, quite a square shape. I don't think that necessarily reflects the linear density that's achievable by the council standards. I think the houses could be deeper in floor plate and narrower, and it is really that constraint, if you like, the plot width constraint, that is determining why there are so few units compared to what could be logically achieved with a different design. That said, I think if you then go to the specifics of the viability appraisal, and again I'll have to alter my page of reference, let me just find that for you, sir. On page 67, and this is more the detail of the viability appraisal, the cat, sorry, that's
Yes, I'm with you.
the council's, Park Lane's 79 unit scheme measures out at 4,622 square metres, and it applies a sales value to that appraisal of 2,122 square metres, giving a total value of 9.8 million. Then in appraising, if you like, the alternative, which I don't think is what could be achieved, but nevertheless, based on that plan, for 62 units, and this is on my page 84, so that's going to be wrong again, sorry, let me find that one for you. On page 78, the alternative scheme for 62 units that Park Lane have prepared.
Sorry.
Yes, you were told to put them on silent at the beginning.
Yeah, I did, sorry, before I went out.
Yes, if you'd like to.
Yes, sir. So the comparable scheme shows if you apply the council standards for 62 units, of 4,605 square metres. So only a difference of 17 square metres, but rather oddly, it then applies completely different sales rates. It then applies, instead of the £2,122 a square metre sales rate on the 79 unit scheme, it applies a sales rate of £1,818 a square metre for the 2 beds and £1,452 a metre
Sorry, what was that second figure?
Sorry, it's 1818 for the 2 beds,
yes,
and 1452 for the 3 beds, which of course then massively changes the overall value. I suppose I've got a question for Park Lane of why that is. In my experience, normally houses are sold on their size and a sales rate.
Right. Can you...
Let the construction manager answer this one.
First of all, on the layout and how we've approached that is the original and the approved scheme works on the council standards of 10 metre back gardens. If you were to increase the depth of the units, you would reduce the length of the gardens and you would actually lose the realigned cul-de-sac from the development. So you'd actually end up with the units at the top of the site that front onto the Cheviots and just a straightforward road down that would follow probably similar to the original Cotswold Close. So you would have actually reduced the number of units further because you would have lost the realigned cul-de-sac, which I don't know the total number of units, I can quickly tot it up, but that would be the principle that you would lose those particular units from the scheme. As far as the sales values are concerned, the original viability on the 79 units used an amalgamation of the 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom houses on that particular scheme, and it was averaged across the square meterage of the site as a whole. As the mix has changed between the 62 unit scheme and the 79 unit scheme, to simply apply an adjusted figure per square metre wouldn't give a true reflection. There's actually more in percentage terms of 3-bedroom units. So the 62 unit scheme has been broken down to show 2 and 3-bedroom houses, but the sales values are the same for both schemes for the particular house types. Does that answer that particular question?
So it answers the question, but it doesn't. I just can't agree that a larger house doesn't attract a higher sale value. And looking at this, something that's 17 square metres in difference changes its value by about 1.5 million, and I just think that can't be right. Are we saying here that there is, if you like, a ceiling price for a 3-bed and a 2-bed?
In this particular location.
Right.
Can I actually just answer that?
Yeah.
There absolutely is a glass ceiling on the value of a house in specific areas, and that would go as far as to say even in affluent areas of London there would be a glass ceiling. So just by simply increasing the size of the house doesn't necessarily increase the value to the purchaser. Their ability to take a mortgage, we specifically target the first-time buyer type market, first and second-time buyer market. It is very difficult for first-time buyers to get onto the first rung of the ladder. There is an oversupply in Hastings of converted flats and indeed new built flats, which very much in the 60s, 70s and 80s and even the 90s were very much the fashion for Hastings. So therefore there's an awful lot of, I wouldn't say unwanted flats, but if you were to do an element of market research among first-time buyers, there is a resistance to move into a flat as opposed to a house. So what we try and do, as with High Breezes, the Cheviots development, we took a site that had a planning permission for mixed houses and flats and managed through, and I think it's been accepted and acknowledged by Hastings Council this morning, through a very acceptable development of private 2 and 3-bedroom houses. The value, if we were to increase the build cost relative to the additional square metres, I think, Lawrence, you said 22,000 for High Breezes, would mean that we would have to, before profit and overheads, we would have to achieve from a bare build cost an additional £22,000 per house will price those houses out to the first-time buyer market, and we are very, very mindful of the fact that there is a need and appetite for that type of house at Hastings.
Okay, just using that particular piece of evidence, if a house goes up 22,000, so that's between, if you like, the 55 square metres that you're proposing against the council's 66, so that's round about this 2,120 square metres that are proposed in the evidence. That would mean then that these 56 square metre houses would be around about the sort of £120,000 mark on that evidence. That would be their, if you like, ceiling sales price.
We're not actually saying.
Well,
we're doing a direct comparison with the viability that was done at the time of the application in the market that was present at the time.
But that's what this evidence says.
Because that was the viability study that was done when we prepared the planning application. All we're trying to do is make a direct comparison with the amended scheme, if you like, with the approved scheme then. We can't reconfigure it and create new values today. We could, but we'd have to apply it to both of them.
Right. So where is this now then? What is the ceiling value of a unit today? Just out of interest.
I would suspect, to be fair, this is slightly impromptu and unprepared. On that particular, well, in fact it would be easier to take the sites that we know we've sold on. So, for example, at the Ridge, the Seacrest View development, they were averaging around 170,000. On that site, we would need to achieve an additional 30,000. You've got to remember that excludes profit and overheads, so that is the bare build cost addition. That doesn't take into consideration the overhead or profit. We would have to achieve an additional 30,000 minimum. Even if you only add 10% to that for overhead and profit, 33,000, if we take a house from 170,000, which is affordable to the first-time buyer, to somewhere in excess of £200,000 for a two-bedroom house, frankly, it's no longer affordable or plausible to expect to achieve for a first-time buyer type house in excess of £200,000.
But your basic point is that you want to have you're asking for a change in the policy, or the policy to be guidance, or the policy to say that it is guidance.
Correct.
So to bring in more flexibility.
Correct.
I mean, that's basically your point.
It is absolutely our point. Our concern is, as Mr. Pickup mentioned earlier, we've even had a recent scheme where there has been discussions with the planning officer concerned, who was trying to impose the minimum size standards, which aren't even policy yet and are being recommended as a guidance only, and yet they were trying to be imposed on a scheme that we were putting through recently. Our concern is that if this is just put through as, even if it is just put through as guidance, we don't believe that it will be used as guidance. We believe it will be used as policy, and I think it's fair to say that, I believe I'm right in saying, but maybe I'll be corrected here, that the 10-metre rear gardens is for guidance. I believe it isn't formal policy, and yet we've never yet managed to have a scheme which has a garden length of less than 10 metres, and there is a good example of how something being used as guidance is actually taken as strict policy.
So may I just conclude before we move on to
Yes, I'm conscious that I think everybody's looking for their lunch. So.
Yeah, I'll be brief. No, my point, the date of this evidence is October 2014. Based on this evidence, the two-bed house is saying it has a sale value of about £120,000. I went on the Park Lane website, and their starting prices for high breezes are declared at £155,000, so they don't tally.
Right. I think the other point we have to realise, of course, is these particular values are, it's good to look at them now, but we are dealing with a plan that's going through to 2028, and I think that puts that does put things in context. So I don't think we want to be bogged down on present values, present costs. We've got to look forward and try and come up with a policy which is flexible enough to take the plan forward to 2028.
I agree. So it was really just to illustrate that I think a bigger house will command a bigger sale value, and certainly a bigger sale value than is declared.
Well, look, what I'd like to do is just go around the table very quickly, taking up points on this policy DM3, then we will go for lunch, and then we will come back and deal with the other aspects of this question about the steady supply of housing land and the housing trajectory. So, yes, I'm going around this way now. Mrs. Brown, what do you wish to say on DM3 and what we've heard about policy, guidance, etc.?
Thank you very much. If we look at 2.3, we're asked, how effective is the plan in delivering a wide choice of high-quality homes? If I look at the recent and past record of this council, it is not effective in delivering high quality. It has not been effective, and I ask anybody who questions that to go and look at Hawthorne Drive in Clyde Vale and see the standard that we have been asked in Hastings to tolerate, because they're the slums of tomorrow, without a doubt. Now, I've sat and listened to somebody trying to reduce these standards, which will hopefully result in higher quality homes being built in the future. And those people who appeal for our heritage to be respected, I ask that our efforts to have better quality housing in this town are respected, and that we stick very rigidly to these policies. I don't want to see guidelines, because deals can be done on guidelines. If it's a policy, then it sticks, and we know we've got quality of the future, because we're not going to continue to improve this town if we reduce quality and standards of living. So I implore you not to reduce them.
Mr. Ingleton.
The standards under DM3F are basically the old Parker Morris standards, which were in effect for many years after the war, and only in the last few years have been put to one side. So they are reasonable standards for a minimum for people to live in decent comfort and in a sensible house. The gardens, 10-metre gardens, aren't very long. It's a reasonable thing to expect somebody actually to get that. The point about Hawthorne Drive is very relevant. I know people that live there, and it's one of the worst developments in the area, and that's the point. The other factor is that what's been talked about really is the number of properties and what have you. The housing density policy in this area is policy H1, and it says there about 30 dwellings per hectare, and then for more dense areas, 40 dwellings. Then the point was brought up about chariots and the Cotswold Close. What had happened is, in fact, in the development management plan for 2013 and 12, 1.3 hectares, possible capacity 63. That's 51 dwellings a hectare, which is a heck of a lot more than 30. Application was put in for 79, and that works out at 64 dwellings a hectare. So they are packing in a huge amount of extra houses onto these sites. So not providing these standards is ridiculous. We really do need to look at these things, because I hear also they're coming back for an extra house on the site. Now the density is high. They're not particularly a mixed and balanced development. They're mode 2 and 3. We really do want better houses in there. And also what happened on that site there was no pre-application public consultation. The planning decision was also made as a delegated decision. It never came before the full council. So the developer in this case has done extremely well. He's got 79 dwellings per hectare, which is back on the 30 dwellings a hectare. He's only got 37, and the other one 49. So they're not doing too badly. They are packed in tight. They're not up to minimum standards. I support 100% the F and G, which the council have actually worked out and produced documents which are right and should be supported.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Jones.
I think there's no provision to supply the very large houses needed for top management in breach of NPPF 47, and that there should be flexibility to provide both very small and very large houses. So I'm against any mandated requirements. I think there should be flexibility that allows the provision of very small and indeed very large houses and a complete range of houses.
So you're arguing for guidance rather than policy, is that?
I'm arguing that there should be neither guidance nor policy.
Nothing.
Right, yes.
Just to pick up again on your comment of figures.
This is not fair.
It may have been produced in October 2000, reproduced in October 2014. It is the exact figures taken from the planning application. And the reason that we didn't change the figures in either that or the approach we took on the 62 unit scheme was because it would have been unfair of us to do so. So we had to compare apples with apples. I absolutely agree that sales values are not what they were when we produced this document, but that's not to say that the market clearly has taken a turn for the better, but more importantly, it still means we need to achieve that much more. In percentage terms, I haven't got a calculator, but my brain tells me it's something like about an 18% increase in sales values in order to be able to provide the larger houses. So I just clarified that is, although it's October 2014, the document you're looking at it is old information.
I don't disagree with. I think we just have to agree to disagree on what the ceiling price might be.
Fine, and then just going back to the layout and your query as to how many more units we arguably could have gone on. Lawrence did point out it was designed on exactly the same basis. We mirrored the design that we did with the 79 units with the 62 units. And the starting point always was, with the 79 units, that we could effectively get 3 rows of houses in, 3 roads of houses in, by by applying the 10-metre rule. So we have stringently stuck to the 10-metre rear gardens, and we've done exactly the same with this scheme. That's how the depth of the houses was arrived at. Sorry, one last point. The mention of the permission being delegated and not going to committee actually is a very good and fair point. And the reason that it was approved under delegated powers is that there were no letters of objection.
Well, I mean, I'm not reviewing council's decisions on planning applications.
No, but I'm just answering.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Hodge.
So can I just conclude on a couple of points on this side, as it were?
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mdungo, please don't get impatient. You're not the only person.
I'm sorry, I'm only getting impatient because we seem to be discussing particular sites which we have specific meetings for, and I don't really think this is something we should be discussing here.
There's no other meeting on this particular matter.
We're looking at policy DM3. Yes.
Just to conclude on the point, I'll try and be brief, is I think we would be content if policy F, the first sentence, were to remain, and if the guidance figures were to come and be then in lower case as to clarification of what point F was intended to achieve, and that would give you a degree of flexibility outside of the policy. And one final point, I think you mentioned that you were going to draft a suggested amendment. Presumably we'll get an opportunity to comment on that if you do.
Actually, it would be helpful though. You've talked about redrafting, was it F and G? Did I get that right? Can I ask you to? Can I give you some homework and If you could let me, then that would be useful for me to go on. And then obviously everybody will have an opportunity. Yes, Mr. Hollidge.
Yes, perhaps before they do that homework, I actually agree with Mr. Jones. I think this is a very dangerous ground to start getting into in terms of being prescriptive to the private market and what they've got to build, because house builders will only build what they can sell, and that's a fact. So if we're going to be prescriptive to house builders, I do have to question how many of these sites will actually be delivered, because if they're not viable, I disagree with the council representative in terms of that by building extra you get extra value. Yes, you do get extra value, but it's not invariably doesn't cost the extra cost of building. Park Lane are in a particular niche position because they're a local house builder, and they can be very reduce costs dramatically than would be house builders from outside of the borough, because there are restrictions in terms of getting contractors onto site into Hastings because of the road infrastructure, etc. And there's additional costs that house builders from outside the area would have to bear. Park Lane can absorb, can make their developments very efficient, if you like, because they're locally based. These house sizes, I mean, it's always been government policy, don't prescribe to the private market. The private market will tell you what can be built. There are, as Park Lane have referred to, absolute glass ceilings in Hastings, and that's predominantly because of the nature of the borough in terms of the wages, which I believe are substantially below the average for the immediate area, and also in the southeast. And so there is a very constricted glass ceiling in Hastings in terms of cost and value, that if you're being prescriptive on these sizes, they simply won't be built, and then your 5-year housing supply and your housing need figures are all up in the air. The figures that I've seen generally come from and I think Mr. Ingleton's probably near the mark when he talks about the Park and Morris, but they're generally what I would say are housing association space standards. And I talk from 30 years experience of working both in the private sector and in the affordable housing sector. And housing associations by and large had to build certain space standards if they were to obtain grant funding from the Department of Community and Local Government and through the HCA. That grant funding's been taken away, and in many cases I've seen housing associations take much smaller units than we're talking about here, because it's simply not viable to develop the sites overall on those space standards. The construction costs just purely outweigh the development viability. And that has a problem in itself, that if you're being prescriptive in terms of what sizes you can build to, what will eventually happen will be all the house builders, particularly from outside of the area, will obtain their planning permissions, and then they will come back to the council and submit viability statements that say the affordable housing percentage, whether it's 20%, 30, 40, is simply not deliverable. And they will have viability studies, and I write a number of them, that would justify that. And those planning permissions will then be altered to allow no affordable housing. So if you're going to be prescriptive on space standards, then I suggest you won't have an affordable housing programme in the borough. And the other factor about that is that this argument in terms of space standards, in terms of the government's direction on this, this is something that is constantly reviewed when they're looking to update building regulations, and I think that's the proper arena for that discussion. It's not for the planners to dictate what should be built in terms of house size. That has come through over many years from the planning inspectorate, from decisions on particular cases where you can't where you can't prescribe what people build. It is for the private market to determine that. But if you don't do that, you'll have no affordable housing. The other points that I'd like to make, again on the wall-by-wall suggestion, that's I've not looked at that particular policy before, but I would suggest that would be open to numerous legal challenges from house builders. I don't think it's a viable proposition. And when we talk about whether this is policy, whether it's guidelines, whatever you want to, again that goes against NPPF in terms of the presumption in favour. And in particular circumstances, I have to congratulate Park Lane Homes if they've actually managed to get planning consents with gardens less than 10 metres, because if that was just a guideline, another client of mine on the site of Frederick Road had an application turned down purely on the ground that the gardens weren't 10 metres in depth. Now that site, we will see from the allocations, is a triangular site. And by the nature of that site, the gardens don't tend to be deep, they tend to be wide to match the houses. So while the width of those gardens was in excess of 10 metres, the depth wasn't. But the overall area of the garden was comfortably in excess of what you would have had on a standard house frontage with a 10 metre depth garden. And I echo their comments that, sorry, can I continue?
Please, just one at a time.
And that was turned down and was turned over, and there was later consent was granted on appeal. So that's a particular situation where what was supposed to be a guideline was a reason for refusing a planning permission. And I also talk about Orr Valley because when I was previously at Amicus Horizon, I had a lot to do with the Orr Valley, and can tell you that those sites in the Orr Valley are of negligible value. And if you start being prescriptive on house sizes, they just simply won't be delivered. There's no land value there. And you're at a situation whereby... sorry, can I continue without interruption?
Yeah.
Similar to Dover, which we've talked about earlier, where the actual cost of construction is more than you can sell the units for. And you just simply won't get this housing delivery that the council are aspiring to. And the other point to take into account there, and I don't know if it's been taken into account in terms of the sort of studies they've done, but my experience is that on site allocations, you start off with a suggested number of units, which is usually worked out by what is the aspiration in terms of number of units per hectare times the size of the site, and that's your starting point. What often happens is you can't actually get that many units on the site. Sometimes you can get more, but quite often you can't get that number of units on site. So the figures that the council have got in for their land supply, I'd have to question on the basis that it doesn't appear that they've done any detailed design work in terms of what density, what actual number of units can physically be put on that site, taking into account the constraints on that site, which the chap from the council kindly tells me that Leeds haven't even visited and haven't even costed. So that doesn't always translate into deliverable number of units. And I think the problem there is going to be exacerbated by having prescriptive unit sizes. And I don't know if that again has been factored into the council's calculations in terms of number of units they're going to deliver. I very much suspect that it hasn't.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Newbold.
I would like to say I'm really alarmed that someone would try to change the floor spaces which are set out in minimum standards. These have been put together over a long length of time, and I've actually been involved in some of these when I worked alongside Borough Homes. A lot of these space positions and the size of them were detailed because of restrictions to people who were incapacitated, having to get through the areas with wheelchairs. And it's very important that these minimum standards are maintained so that disabled access is available to them. This is something that if you cut down the size of these sites or the room sizes substantially, it makes it incredibly difficult to get a wheelchair or access through that to actually do that. So I think it's important that these minimum standards are here and the room sizes are of that minimum sizes to facilitate that. Otherwise you start running into problems where you get a minority is allowed to actually rent them because you can't get disabled access in it, and that's not really good enough. I think I would really not like you to see you alter or put into paperwork something about these sizes when we do have minimum standards here to do this. As I said, they are a particular size because of the work that's been done in the past to do this, and I think that's very important that that's kept. I won't go into the history of the site, but I hope we're going to do that after lunch. But I do think that there is a delivery problem with a lot of the sites. We've already heard that there are glass ceilings for property, which means that you've got to get that cost back somewhere. And it's been said that my learned gentleman here should have to pay for it, being the landowner. I don't think that's very right either. Okay. Surely if something is viable to develop on a site, it's viable on its own merits and its own fact that it'll make income to do it. The reality of doing a building or building work on a site where the costs are far outweighing the actual retail value of the property seems a complete nonsense.
Okay. Right. Mr. Keeley.
Just quickly, sorry, upon the affordable housing, are these developers suggesting we don't have affordable housing on some sites? The general rule is do pepper potting, I think. Otherwise we're going in the road of saying some sites are having social housing and some will only have market housing. But on the size, we've got an issue with older people's care, very much in the fore at the moment. And we may well have to look at houses big enough for grandchildren to look after grandparents. Therefore, if anything, we need bigger houses. We ought to look into the costs. We can't do that today, but I've had information telling me that the house doesn't cost that much to build, and I think perhaps tonight I will see if I can get some figures on that, because the land, as my colleague to my left here just said, if you say it's not viable, then don't go and pay millions for the site in the first place. Simple as that. Thank you.
Right, well look, it's now 1:30. I can certainly do with something to read. I'm sure everybody else could. So we will return to this, and when we come back, Mr. Holledge, I know you want to speak again, so I'll come to you first when we get...
Just a very minor,
very
minor point just on Mr. Newbold's issue on space standards and wheelchair users. It is a point. I mean, housing associations usually provide what are called lifetime homes as a percentage of the affordable units they provide, which are specifically designed to cater for that. You can't prescribe that all the private market housing is built to that standard. That's simply inefficient because people aren't going to pay for the extra space if they don't need it.
Okay, right.
Can I just say that is not true. Amicus Horizon now do not offer lifetime houses. All the houses are actually on a lease basis.
Okay, well, yes. When we come back, I will ask the council to respond. So it's now time for lunch. I mean, we are running a bit short of time. If I reconvened at 2:15 rather than your usual hour, would that be acceptable?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good. Right. So 2:15, we'll be back.